This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 10 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So, I mean, a few things that have been on my mind lately. I was struck by a message you sent me last week about the White Rose, the resistance to the Nazis within Germany through the 30s and 40s, and how rare it was, how rare resistance was, and how quickly things get normalised. You know that I often think of that article in Harper's Magazine from the early 40s, by a writer who went on to become a great historian of Nazism, and she was contemplating a social situation and wondering, in the events of Nazis rising in the United States, who in her company would become part of the process, part of the project, who would resist it, and who would keep their head down. I think one of the things that history doesn't teach us, or one of the things that history necessarily overlooks, is the people who do nothing. History is generally the story of people who do things, right? People who do stuff. And if they're doing bad stuff, the people who resist them. It's not often about the people who do nothing, the people who are not that invested in who is in charge. Even if they're undertaking atrocities, the atrocities don't reach them. They've got bills to pay. You know, they've got jobs to do. And then there are the people who are quietly complicit in the really bad stuff. I looked at the front page of the Daily Telegraph today, and I'm afraid I heard echoes of the 1930s. There's a massive picture of Melania Trump, and no story at all, just a massive picture of her, saying Melania's salute to women of courage. Put me in mind of Leni Riefenstahl. I mean, it looks like propaganda. Here's a massive picture of a woman, and she is saluting women of courage, even as her husband embarks upon a project so loaded with misogyny that you wonder whether you've taken leave of your own senses. Story yesterday, I told you I've already lost. I've already failed to keep up with everything, so I forgot to mention to you yesterday the story of the man who had been deported by accident and is now in a horrible prison, and the courts can't bring him back. The American administration has admitted that he is there by accident. It's a clerical error. Imagine if that was you, or that was your dad, but it's not a white man. It's, I think, a Hispanic man, so it won't register in the way that it may otherwise have done. And that question there of what do you do? I mean, how bad is it? You're getting the articles. Daily Mail, for some reason, has started paying Daniel Hannan to write articles again. The world's wrongest man. Inevitably slotted into the House of Lords by Boris Johnson. But, writing articles about, Trump's absolutely awful, but perhaps he's right about this. Or Trump's absolutely awful. They're not even pretending he's not absolutely awful anymore. They're just giving you the Mussolini made the trains run on time line. Say what you like about Mussolini, but at least the trains ran on time. That's where we are now already. He's only been president for 2 months. And that's, and then, of course, you've got the domestic situation. If you don't know, that's a bit of a miracle, because I cannot be accused of being quiet about it or not mentioning it very often. So I wrote a book a couple of years ago called How They Broke Britain. And today's news contains, as you will have heard, probably, the news that the NHS satisfaction has hit a historic low. I'd remind you, it hit a historic high in 2010, shortly before Gordon Brown ceased to be Prime Minister. It's now hit a historic low. I've got another story for you about police services in England, Wales and Northern Ireland being too overworked to investigate crimes properly. So demoralising for police officers. And that came before the news this morning about potential cuts to the Metropolitan Police. So what are the two biggest institutions that ordinary citizens rely on? What is the biggest bang you get for your tax buck? Probably the NHS and the police, right? If you leave pensions and things out of it, in terms of what you get. The bin's emptied, unless you're in Birmingham. You get the NHS and you get the police, and they're both at historic lows. And that's the country Keir Starmer is governing. That's the country Keir Starmer is governing. And what do you do? What do you do when you are reliant upon somebody who wishes you harm? I I don't know what the answer is to the question of how do you deal with a bully who has great power over you. First thing to acknowledge, of course, is the fact that if we were part of the European Union, he would have less power over us. Second thing to acknowledge is we don't currently know for sure what's going to be contained within the tariffs that are announced in the White House later today, but they cannot be good news for the UK. By under any reading, there cannot really be any good news for the United Kingdom. We are upon the precipice of what almost all experts describe as a global trade war. President Trump is expected to hit Britain with tariffs today, reports Rupert Murdoch's Times newspaper, that will take immediate effect, forcing ministers to tell businesses to brace themselves for a turbulent economic time. The tiny bit of wriggle room that Rachel Reeves identified, or rather that the OBR gave to Rachel Reeves before her autumn statement, will be wiped out in a flash, in a nanosecond, if and when these tariffs land. Crippling is the word used on the front page of the Daily Mail, a newspaper which, of course, still employs several columnists who were cheering Donald Trump's re-election to the rafters not long ago. Now the same newspaper is reporting upon his plans to, quotes, cripple, end quotes, this country for no apparent reason, or at least for no reason that we managed to identify yesterday. A string of downgrades to the British economy as a consequence of this so-called Liberation Day. We import, the US imports 2.3 trillion, not from here, but 20% tariffs on all of that. And then a story on the front of The Guardian, which caught my eye and which should probably have caught yours, about the US tech firms being offered preferential tax terms by Keir Starmer in return for lower tariffs. And this, again, to quote the front page, as the UK government braces itself for a global trade war. Headline rate of digital services tax reduced in an effort to placate the US president, except it doesn't placate the US president. It placates those men who were sitting behind him at the inauguration. It placates the barons, the 21st century barons who have such sway over the Mango Mussolini that their interests are often conflated with his. I'm not sure that that's the right way to play it. I'm not sure of anything at the moment when it comes to the traditional tools that we use to analyse politics being largely useless when you're dealing with something so untraditional, so abnormal. And that's Starmer's problem, isn't it? And so that's what I want you to talk to me about today. I want you to talk to me about what Starmer should do. How should he be bending to Trump? I think we missed quite a big point yesterday when we were talking about tariffs, partly because I was in an oddly contrary mood and partly because I think sometimes I haven't got the question quite right if I'm unsatisfied with the call. Some of the calls were brilliant yesterday, but some were not. And that's always my fault, not yours. And one of the things we missed, one of the things I got wrong yesterday was the sense of leverage. It's not just about getting British firms, getting non-US firms to move manufacturing into America. It's not just about the plan or the hope of raising lots of cash from tariffs, which will enable him to give tax cuts to lots of people, most obviously the richest people in the United States. It occurred to me that sometimes the abasement is the point. Sometimes with Trump, like with all hideous bullies, it's the abasement that is the point. It's the means and the end to his self-aggrandizement. It doesn't matter whether or not there is a subtext or a plan behind the actual humiliation. He loves to see people prostrating themselves before him. If you look at the people who have been critical of him in the past but have somehow been welcomed back into the fold, they are always welcomed back broken. Marco Rubio, broken. The people that Lindsey Graham, broken. The people that have even said that the barest boo to the Trump goose are never excluded from his court permanently. They're always allowed back in as long as they come in on their knees, as long as they come in covered in metaphorical sackcloth and ashes, as long as they come in humiliated and debased. And that is part of what these tariffs are designed to do. It is an exercise of strength. It is an exercise of power and might that has nothing to do with him. It's power and might accrued by all of the things that Trump hates about the United States of America, accrued by globalism, accrued by a leadership role on the world stage, accrued by Pax Americana, accrued by massive international spending, accrued by all of the things he despises most for reasons that I don't think anybody has properly worked out, have created a country that enjoys enormous power, economic, military, political power. All of that comes with the job. It's not anything that Trump has created or even in any large part contributed to. And it is that power created by all of the things he hates, liberal democracy, free trade, global leadership, all of the things he hates the most have created the power that he is now going to wield. And he's going to wield it by putting Europe and, putting every other country on the planet in a except Russia, in a thumbscrew. He is going to try to hurt us. And it is going to succeed. He is going to hurt us. And we could sit here for weeks wondering why. I think it was the thing I missed yesterday. The thing we all missed yesterday is that perhaps the answer to the question of why Donald Trump is doing this is the simplest answer of all. The 3-word answer. Because he can. Why are you doing this? Because I can. What's the point? Doesn't matter. I'm going to hurt everybody. Everyone will see my power. Everyone will feel my wrath. Everyone will want to please me. Everyone will bend. Some will break, but all will crawl in order to avoid the pain of my power. Of course, it's not his power. It's America's power. But you tell me what the difference is. You tell me where one stops and the other ends. And, of course, he's trying to break down all of the safeguards and institutions that protect the American Constitution or the American country from dictatorship, already making noises about a possible third term. So, I mean, I think that's it, don't you, now? And by the way, you think my monologues are long, you should check out that congressman in the United States of America who spoke for 25 hours straight yesterday. We'll be paying tribute to him shortly. I believe a lot of it was reading, though, so I don't consider him to be competition. I think that's it. Why is Trump doing it? Because he can. He doesn't know what happens next, but he knows that once you have humiliated, we're not even opponents. We're supposed to be allies. But he still wants to humiliate us. He is still going to hurt us. Saying it's about £1 billion in Scotch whisky exports to the United States of America alone. That's $6 billion in cars, all the high-end car. But it's going to hurt you all. Why is he doing it? Because he can. Because he wants to. I almost feel I could go home now. I came off air yesterday quite frustrated. I always am frustrated when I feel we haven't made proper progress. I don't come off. I hate more than anything coming off air, finishing our time together, not feeling that I understand the stuff we talked about a little bit more than I did before we talked about it. And I feel I let you down when that happens as well. It doesn't happen very often, touch wood. But when it does, it means I've not done my job very well. I came off air yesterday and I didn't understand this more than I did before I started talking. And I already do now. Why is he doing it? Because he can. What's the point? To hurt us. He doesn't know what happens next. He just knows that if the people he is dealing with, and if you see everybody as an enemy, if everybody is an opponent, then the phrase the people you are dealing with becomes quite loaded, right? But when the people who you are dealing with are broken or are humbled, is a good word. They're humbled. They're on their knees. Then you are much more likely to get your own way. Whatever your own way is. You say to him, what is your way? He doesn't even know. And that's why the front page of The Guardian struck me as quite sinister this morning. The two front pages. The front page of the Daily Telegraph, which might as well be, a Hitler-supporting Daily Mail in the 1930s. Just a big picture of Melania Trump saluting women of courage. No context, no story, not even a link to a page within that tells you what was actually going on. It's just an excuse to print a massive picture of her appearing to be noble and good and generous. And then the front page of The Guardian about our Prime Minister already on one knee. Oh, well, in order to avoid the pain that you can bring to bear upon us, Mr. President, would you like these shiny baubles? Would you like these jewels? Would you like these tax cuts for the most wealthy and powerful companies in the world? They should be paying less tax than I do, than you do, than we do. Yes, we must. We must bend the knee. And here's the question for you. It's all about hurting people, isn't it? It's all about hurting people. A couple of people saying, here's good. Andrew, it's like grooming, isn't it, James? Yes, it is. It's the zero-sum game, says Craig. No matter what it is, he has to feel that he's winning every day, and that means he has to be hurting. It means someone has to lose. It's all about hurting people. And David says, I didn't think you did, actually, for what it's worth, but you are allowed to have a bad day at the office occasionally. You're very kind. I'm my own worst critic. Do you know what the question is yet? It's not a nice one. You may not like it. It brings the Ming vase back into play, you know? Old Keir Starmer carrying that Ming vase across the ice rink to get Labour into power, but what's he going to do with it when he gets there? The pragmatist, the man with no ideology, the man whose role is simply to solve problems. How do you solve a problem like Trump? You roll over. You can't stand up to him. You can't fight back. European Union already announced that it will. Keir Starmer already announced that he won't. Does he have any choice? Does the Prime Minister of Brexit Britain have any choice but to answer an American president screaming jump with the two-word legend, how high? How high, Mr. President? Jump! Starmer, jump! How high, Mr. President? How high? Does he have any choice? 03456060973. I don't think he does at the moment. I might give you money if you can persuade me that he does have a choice. Because I hate the idea of my country being reduced to mewling how high when the Mango Mussolini screams, jump, Britain, jump. Does he have any choice? How do you stand up to this? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. How do you stand up to this, or do you have to roll over? It's 10:21.
James O'Brien on LBC.
23 minutes after 10 is the time. I suppose there is a glimmer of hope in that if he's going to punish you when you haven't done anything wrong, you have nothing to lose when you fight back. If the punishment comes before the negotiation, the punishment comes before the prostration, then why not, as Adam suggests? Shut down the social media platforms, regulate them properly, stop them from operating in the UK, or hit them with some very, very heavy taxes. Trump is nothing without X and Facebook and TikTok and the rest of it. I don't know. I mean, it could be that is one of the things that you do, but it could be that it makes everything worse. And an awful lot of you, perhaps inevitably given this programme and its history, an awful lot of you are pointing out just how better our position would be had we not voted to become the first population in history to impose economic sanctions on itself and abolish our own freedoms back in 2016. But I'm afraid that ship has sailed, and whether or not we can board it again at some point in the future is currently unknown. The question really today is this: does Keir Starmer have any choice whatsoever but to bend the knee, whatever figure of speech you prefer, bend the knee, prostrate himself, ask how high when Trump screams jump? Or does Brexit Britain, does the United Kingdom, does the Labour government have actual options? It's 24 minutes after 10. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm just waiting for a call. I've got an absolutely full switchboard, but I'm just waiting for a call to be put through so that we can get stuck into this straight away, okay? And that, if you want to join the conversation, that is the question that you need to answer. Does Keir Starmer have any choice at all in the current situation other than to do what he appears to be doing, a sort of preemptive offer of lower tariff, lower taxes, what do you want? You tell me what you want, and I'll do it. Neil's in Coulsdon. Neil, what would you like to say?
Oh, James, you got me rattled, but all in a good way. Trump is a bully, and bullies only respect strength.
So what does that look like?
He hits us with 20%. We hit him with 50%.
But that means that you have to pay a 50% tariff on everything you're buying that's come into this country from the United States of America. We're too small to matter.
Then we talk to Europe. We all work together.
We can't, can we? Because we're not in the single market.
Mate, I know. I didn't.
I'm not. I mean, the frustration is real. I would love to think that telling him to grow a pair is a meaningful contribution to the conversation, but I don't think it is. I'd love to hear the substance, the detail of what it is that he can do differently. I hate this headline. I hate the idea, not just that it is bending the knee, as it were, but also that it's bending the knee to the major US technology companies who are in many ways responsible for so many of the problems that we face. But what other choice does he have?
But we're not taxing them, James.
But he's offering tax cuts in order to avoid the tariffs. I mean, you say stick 50 on. That doesn't work. You know that. What would work? What would we have? What heft do we have that would actually make him go, they can hurt us more than we can hurt them? It's just not true. It's not true in any circumstances. It's not true on any level.
No, James, I'm not wanting an argument. I just think, something else is, we all, I think most people would agree with that. And, he's out of the game. He's doing things that no one else has ever done before. But what else can we do?
Bend over. Assume the position.
No, we're Great Britain, James. We don't bend over.
Well, we do, actually.
We kneel to our sovereign and my mother.
And my mother, did you say? I completely agree with that. Tim's in Tredegar. Tim, what choice have we got?
Well, James, the previous caller just said there, he is a bully, but we don't need to leave this decision to Starmer or any other politician. We can make decisions ourselves. Money talks. We just stop buying American goods where we can. And you might, just like you just did, let's say to the last caller, we're too small to make a difference. Well, rather than looking at doing things through politicians and on a European basis, somebody just needs to start a movement like that young teenager did with the environment. Let's stop buying American goods, get off Twitter, don't buy Tesla, don't use Amazon, and they would soon start coming around. And then you can forget about tariffs. It doesn't matter. We wouldn't be paying a 25% tariff because we wouldn't be buying the goods.
I'll tell you what, Tim. I'd vote for you. Yeah. I love this. And I saw it yesterday from a sort of august economist suggesting that we're going to have to resurrect. When was Buy British last a big thing? Can you remember? When were the slogans and posters?
It was a long time ago.
It feels like a very... And obviously we don't have the manufacturing base that we have. And I think I did a phone-in a slightly mischievous fashion a few years ago. And I said, if you really did want to buy British... What would you buy? Where would you go? And there wasn't a lot of choice there, but we could certainly do a hell of a lot more.
We are not constrained like politicians are. I mean, for them to turn around and say, like, buy British, you would probably start another trade war or something else. But if individuals make the decisions themselves to stop purchasing, I've just come back from America on holiday, and we said we won't go back to America, in the foreseeable future again.
Most obviously it's going to be Teslas and then just buying British, and I wonder how feasible that is. I like this, and it does take the responsibility away from Downing Street and put it back in the hands of ordinary people. But I'm going to steer you, if I may, back to Downing Street and ask, while we do what you describe in an ideal world, what should the Prime Minister be doing?
I think he should be doing what he's doing right now. I honestly hope that he's not a stupid person. He knows that when push comes to shove, he's going to have to take some action down the road. And of course, that hasn't happened. It hasn't come to that point yet. But when that point comes, I hope he does come back strong.
And what does that look like, do you think?
Well, it does mean reciprocal tariffs. It does mean, as much as it hurts, that's what you've got to do. Or look at it the other way. What's the alternative?
What is I've told you what the alternative. The alternative is just to keep asking how high. Is that high enough, Mr. President? No, it's not. Jump higher, 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 higher. And that's what he's like, right? You see how when he deals with people like Marco Rubio, he derives it. The only pleasure in his life comes from breaking things and hurting people. Yeah. But he can only do that if you allow him to do it. I like your attitude. It's cheered me up. In fact, I'm going to adopt it. I'd struggle without Amazon, I think, but you're going to have to try, aren't you?
going to have to try.
On some level, the problem is, that's why Greta Thunberg is such a good example. It's hard to imagine making much of an impact, but she can then become an inspiration to everybody. What are they called? Micro actions, millions, billions of micro actions. What do they add up to? Very, very, very big action. Tim, take care. It's 10:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I must introduce you to that extraordinary intervention from the US politician Cory Booker as well. But first, Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Be more Tim, eh? We could all be more Tim. Does it matter? There's probably another topic. There's probably an entire conversation in that. Can we buy British? What does backing Britain look like? This guy says Barbarella has inspired me to take one more small step this week. I will move my long Amazon book wish list to Waterstones. Everyone should make a similar pledge. And I have to acknowledge immediately at this point that it costs more money sometimes to do the right thing as opposed to do the reasonable thing. And there's a reason why we generally look at the price of things before we buy them. So it will cost money to buy British. But I tell you what, Tim has touched an awful lot of people with that. This guy is correct. Buy British and Ukrainian and Taiwanese and Canadian, says Ian in Hertfordshire. We do what we can do. Simple changes. New laws, perhaps, that every product needs to display where it came from on its packaging, and every online website must allow users to filter by source, country, or where imported from. I mean, the phrase global trade war is so huge that you begin to wonder where you even start nibbling at the edges of it. But I think Tim's done well there. Gareth is in Darmstadt in Germany. Gareth, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yes, the most effective thing to do in terms of our own economy is to do nothing in retaliation.
Are you Welsh?
Forgetting.
Are you Welsh as well?
Oh, yeah.
It's the takeover. It's finally happening. The show is finally being taken over by the Welsh today. And my God, it's about time too. Go on, tell me more. Tell me more about doing nothing. Something which I am actually quite good at, doing nothing. I just rarely get the opportunity to prove it these days. What do you mean? Tell me more.
Well, politically, the strong thing to do is, well, you've put these tariffs on us, we need to put tariffs on you. But economically, as everybody's been laughing at, all the economic literates have been laughing at Trump, you're punishing yourself because tariffs punish both sides. The concept of a trade war is a nonsense because when you're attacking the other side, you're also attacking yourself. So do you want to double the impact by
But that's capitulation.
Image.
That's capitulation.
Well, but not if the narrative's right. Not if you turn around and say, feel free to punish your own people. Yeah, sure, you're punishing us, but you're punishing your own people too. But we're not going to do that.
Oh, this is good stuff, isn't it? This
economically, it makes no sense. I mean, Henry George was writing about this 2 centuries ago, about the futility. If you forget that one is a seller, one is a buyer, one is being punished, one isn't. When you stop a trade, both sides. It's what you say about Brexit. You're shooting yourself in the foot by imposing tariffs. But then if you're prepared to stand up and say, actually, you're wrong about them in the first place, we know better. This economics says, sure, it's going to hurt us. It's equally going to hurt you. But if the rest of the world, Canada, if the rest of the world just turned around and said, feel free, fill your boots, we're not going to do it. Of course it's going to hurt us, but it's going to hurt you more because you're doing it to everybody.
So it will spool out.
We can trade with everyone else.
So what you mean is you sit it out. It's not a capitulation. You just wait for the project to fall apart. From his side of the Atlantic. Because he has to keep explaining to American voters why they're paying 20% tariffs on everything and we're not.
Yeah, and well, we help explain to the American people as well when we can get through to them that we're not punishing you. We're not punishing the American people. We're not punishing. We're only taking our side of the hurt of the tariffs he's imposing, and you're having to take your side of the hurt.
So you see Starmer's approach then as being, because I mean the bad news for you is that you're in Germany and the EU is set to retaliate. Ursula von der Leyen has made it clear that they have a strong plan to retaliate against tariffs, and there's only really one way you can imagine retaliation against tariffs, it's tariffs, whereas Starmer is being a lot more cautious, a lot more pragmatic, and a lot more, I might have said fearful before I started talking to you, but you would say sensible.
Yeah, yes, and I saw that, and about the EU, and I thought, it's a shame because you're buying into the narrative that a trade war needs to be fought on both sides. But whereas, in fact, the first to move is imposing equal harm on both sides. Now, what you can do, and it's limited, is work together with everyone who's not playing those silly games. What you can do is to do what you can to help limit the harm. If there are companies who are looking weak, to see if there is a way of, well, through trade, as the compatriot was saying,
your fellow Welshman,
or by other means, to try and help keep.
So how does it end? Briefly, Gareth. How does it end?
How does it end? I think the Americans, if not Trump, I can't see Trump seeing sense. That's a no-go. But Americans somehow make it clear to the powers there that it's hurting them as much as it's hurting anyone else. It doesn't work.
And that is the lesson of not just Henry George, but the last 8 decades of certainties about the transatlantic relationship, all of which are being immolated as we speak. Well, wow, today's show so far, a tale of two Welshmen, Tim and Gareth combined, coming up with not only answers to the questions that I'm asking, but also slightly upbeat analyses. We can do something, and Starmer isn't necessarily doing the wrong thing by not rattling his economic sabres and threatening the kind of retaliation that Ursula von der Leyen is threatening. And what I like most about Gareth's analysis is that we don't... it almost makes Brexit a very, very, very mild positive, in that we're not going to be part of a collective response from the European Union. We are going to have a degree of independence. It could all, of course, blow up in the Prime Minister and our faces. Thank you, Gareth. Ian's in Leeds. Ian, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Yeah, I'm thinking a three-pronged attack, personally. I love Tim's idea. It's a great idea in itself. The last caller had a point as well. So why don't we do both of those? And then on top of that, instead of kowtowing to this buffoon, we actually go to our ready-made Commonwealth, get rid of any tariffs or VATs on all of those, so it's a full-on free trade Commonwealth, and then hopefully we'll be able to help each other to succeed while we watch the buffoon lose.
Makes building closer ties with the European Union much harder moving forward. Those kind of trade deals. But you've got 56 member states in the Commonwealth of Nations, and I think some trade was reduced, wasn't it, as a consequence of joining the common market back in the early 1970s. And they are very far away. They're largely much further away than our European...
And I do understand the logistics. However, we have unfortunately been dealt the cards we have due to Brexit. And rather than getting on your knees and kowtowing to this idiot, it would be a much more sensible move to stop making phone calls there and start making phone calls to Canada.
This is where my pendulum swings. I mean, would it really? When you think about the heft that the United States has, getting the United States out of the UK economy would be like getting the eggs out of a baked cake. And Starmer, ever the pragmatist, if we use words like kowtowing or bending the knee or prostrating himself, we create a very negative image. If we use words like making the best of a bad lot or negotiating or trying to minimize damage, then you can make exactly the same tactics sound more positive. Does he really? Go on.
You're making a smart point as well, and so why don't we do all four?
Yeah.
There's no law that says that we can't sort of appease the idiot, contact our Commonwealth. If that's how you win, you don't win from hitting on one front, do you? You never win a war from one front. You win a situation by coming at it from all sides.
And doing everything you can.
Exactly.
Makes communications important again, the area on which almost everybody agrees that the current government is failing miserably. It makes communications really important, and there's only so much you can tell the people, especially if you're undertaking a kind of, not cloak and dagger necessarily, but a 3D chess approach to it, while trying to minimise the need for Trump and simultaneously accommodating his bullying, accommodating his appetites. I'll tell you what, I haven't had a single... Thank you, Ian. It's a Welsh name. I haven't had a single challenge yet to the idea that he's just doing it because he can. It is literally how he operates. You debase, you hurt, you humiliate the negotiating partner. It's not even an enemy, is it? It's that you humiliate them, you hurt them, you bring them to their knees, and then you hit them for whatever it is that you want. 10:43 is the time. Phil's in Westminster. Phil, what would you like to say?
Hi. What I'd like to say is that there's only one bargaining chip that we have in this entire scenario.
Go on.
Just one thing that we've got that he'd like to get from us. Now, typically, just like he gave away a lot of his supposed bargaining strength when he started talking about what was going to happen in Ukraine, we've got a bit of a problem because Starmer has already given away a state visit.
Oh, yeah?
The state visit. The only thing that Donald Trump doesn't have that he's been offered, which is a unique thing. No one has ever had 2 state visits, and that he covets. He cut the diaper Gucci wants to get that double state visit.
And that plays into the uniqueness of the situation. It's not as if you are dealing with a normal or a rational politician. You are. How do you deal with this narcissist? Feed his narcissism.
There's something further that from last week in listening. There's one thing that might help looking at it. He's amoral.
Yes.
He's truly amoral. And that's really, really rare. It's very rare to meet truly amoral people. I've met a few, and I've observed a few in my life.
Yes.
And one thing that it's like a black hole, right? Amorality, in its truest sense, is so rare that the people who are amoral attract people to them, people who are lost, people who are looking for something, people who want to connect to something that looks powerful, right? So truly amoral people usually do well.
Sure.
Malcolm McLaren,
Don't libel anybody, but you mean somebody who is untrammeled by shame or conscience or empathy or competition. And you're right, it is rare because even people who do terrible things feel bad about it sometimes. You're talking about someone who does terrible things and doesn't feel a single jot of remorse or regret.
Yeah, because as a media person, the only thing he cares about is column inches, right? That's another element. It's good press, bad press, it doesn't matter. It's how much press. And now he's the most talked about person on the planet, and he will be forever.
And he just relishes that. So you hurt him by taking away something he values, and all he values is self-aggrandizement, and the state visit was one of the most wonderful. So it looked like a masterstroke at the time, but you're suggesting Starmer moved a bit early. I like it. Okay, this is more, what was the word I want, edifying and uplifting than yesterday. We're actually getting meaningful answers to some of the questions that we're asking, but over the pond, not that pond, the other pond, over the channel in Brussels, the European Union is reportedly considering opening up new battlefronts in response to the tariffs, so-called reciprocal tariffs moving in. But you're looking at not just Harley Davidsons and bourbon whiskey. You're looking at the possibility that they might go after Silicon Valley and Wall Street as well. Politico reporting just, I think, in the last few minutes, in fact, or certainly this morning, that the EU is readying counterstrikes on big tech and US banks. But that's not the UK. Listen, you know I hate Brexit. You know I've done a bang-up job of explaining to you time and time again why it was so silly and why you shouldn't blame the people that voted for it. You should blame the people that lied to them in order to secure their votes. But it doesn't necessarily mean that not being part of the European Union at this moment is an unalloyed bad, is a complete negative. It doesn't necessarily mean that. Just because we can't do what they can do doesn't mean that what we can do isn't good for us. That's about as close to optimism as you'll ever get. And Stu, thank you, points out all chess is 3D, James. I think you mean 4D. Everyone's a critic.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:49. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Mike says, so we've got Tesla, you've got bourbon whiskey, American whiskey, McDonald's, Burger King, Harley Davidson. What else can we boycott? I don't know. It just is that idea that Tim, it was, who explained the fact if you're feeling a lack of agency, if you're feeling a lack of power, and a lot of us are at the moment, I suspect Keir Starmer probably is as well, it's just quite uplifting, wasn't it, to be reminded that there might be little things that you can do. And it brings me to Senator Cory Booker and what he did yesterday. What's remarkable about what he did yesterday is sometimes I have a little chat with Keith during the break and we discuss what clips we're going to play. And he says, do you want the whole thing or do you just want the short version? And on this occasion, if we played the whole thing, it would end just in time for Mystery Hour. Don't worry, don't check your calendar. It's still Wednesday. But if we played Cory Booker's entire speech to the Senate chamber, it would end just in time for Mystery Hour, as in just before 12 noon tomorrow. He spoke for 25 hours straight and went in hard on Donald Trump and Elon Musk and what they represent and what they are doing to his country. It's kind of like the oratorical equivalent of what we've been doing here yesterday and today, trying to work out what resistance looks like, what agency looks like. The Democrats, of course, have no real leader. They've appeared lame and leaderless, as David Smith writes from Washington today in The Guardian, lame and leaderless for 72 days. But then Senator Cory Booker stood up and did something about it. Here's just a little flavour, and it is, just to clarify with Keith, can we play the short version, please, not the 25-hour-long version?
Nay, behold, Lord, here I am. And so I confess that I have been imperfect. I confess that I've been inadequate to the moment. I confess that the Democratic Party has made terrible mistakes, that have given lane to this demagogue. I confess we all must look in the mirror and say we will do better. And it's not just defining ourselves what we're against. We, the next generation, as the baby boomers are leaving the stage, the last baby boomer president, we have to say that we're going to redeem the dream. We're going to dream America anew. We're going to start talking about bold things that don't divide people, that unite people. Bold things that excite the moral imagination of a country to do better, to go higher, that call us together. This is the time where new leaders in our country must emerge. I'm not talking about senators. I'm talking about citizens.
That's same as Tim in Cardiff, not talking about prime ministers, talking about citizens. And you can understand the emotion there. I don't think he'd been to the I don't think he'd had a drink since Sunday of liquid, so he was dehydrating himself in order to ensure that he wouldn't be able to leave the Senate floor for as long as possible. He broke all the records. I think the record was held by a white supremacist, actually, who was objecting to the Civil Rights Act. It got quite a Scandinavian name, if memory serves. But it's broken now. And he even asked someone to move the chair so that he wouldn't even be tempted to sit down. 25 hours straight. Absolutely incredible. But it's not about senators, it's about citizens. And oddly, that is one of the answers that's come up in the question to what should Starmer do. But I still want that question answered. The EU appears to be preparing to go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump. We can't, I don't think. We just don't have the heft. That's not necessarily as bad as it sounds, because it means we might have other options. But what are they? Either for you as a punter or for Keir Starmer as a Prime Minister. Lars is in Denmark, which has also, of course, been insulted pretty horribly by Donald Trump in the 2 months that he's held power. Lars, what would you like to say?
Well, I think that neither Starmer nor von der Leyen should do anything. I think the consumers should do something. Think back to the 70s and the 80s with apartheid.
Yes.
It was the consumers who overthrew apartheid in the end. In Denmark, there is a Facebook group which is Boycott American Products. And that has been brought up in the media in the United States.
Yes.
Because at the same time, there's been a survey made which showed that 8 out of 10 Danes are aware of buying American products, and 4 out of 10 Danes have stopped buying American products.
Really?
Now, yeah, and that includes, for example, a product like Coca-Cola.
Yes.
Coca-Cola is manufactured on license in Denmark by Danish employees. However, the money ends up in America. And you just made a mistake before. You said that Burger King is an American product. It isn't. That's a Canadian product.
Excusez-moi, I was reading out a text from Mike, so if you've got a beef, you've got a beef with him, not with me.
Yeah. But I take your point. It used to be a UK product when Grant, I think it was Glen Metropolitan took over Pilbury's.
So it's doable. You think it's doable? I mean, Denmark, respectfully, Lars, is not big enough really to land much of a punch on the United States. But of course, the strength lies in numbers. I would also add, and I know you know this, that it wasn't just like voluntary boycotts. There were economic sanctions visited upon South Africa by the international community that probably played a larger part than individual shopping-based decisions.
It doesn't matter if I do it. It doesn't matter if you do it. It matters a bit if you and I do it. And it matters a hell of a lot more if you, me, Mrs. Jones, Mrs. Jennings, all the others do it as well.
Mrs. Mulby.
Mrs. Mulby, for that matter, too, yeah.
It's 10:55. Thank you, Lars. 25 nations by the time the United States and the United Kingdom joined in. They were initially reluctant. Some of the comments that Margaret Thatcher made about Nelson Mandela have not aged well, but by the late 80s, South Africa was buckling under the pressure of international sanctions. The idea of doing something similar to the United States still seems fanciful, but how much of what's happened in the last 2 months would you have said 10 years ago would be happening in 2025? Thank you, Lars. From Denmark to Dulwich. Patrick's in East Dulwich. What would you like to say, Patrick?
Well, hello. Thanks for taking the call.
Very welcome.
I read The Guardian this morning. I felt that Mr. Starmer was rolling over as well. A little bit disappointing.
Yes.
But the previous caller mentioning the state visit kind of made the point that I was wanting to make, which is that Trump is he likes the nice things in life. He's a child. He wants to be taken into account, and I think the only leverage Starmer really has over a man like him is to discreetly let it be known that maybe the state visit may not happen, and for him to lose face over that would you can't
in all conscience, Mr. President, we cannot keep this invitation because of the damage that you've done to our manufacturing base, to our country. It's with great regret that we're going to have to rethink that invitation because of what you've just done to us. I can't take you to the King's house, mate. When we've even got tariffs on the Dutchy original biscuits making their way into Manhattan. You've put tariffs on the King. You've got tariffs on everything. And what I hate and like about this at the same time is that it speaks to the uniqueness of the situation. Because it sounds ridiculous, right? That the most powerful man in the world, or one of them, could be so petty and so mean-minded and so self-obsessed and so narcissistic that actually an aggrandizing invitation would carry more heft and more weight than 50 pages of tight economic response. But I think if we know anything about him, we probably know that that's true, don't we?
Well, if it was a part of a grand plan by Starmer to have that in his back pocket, he's played a blinder. But
put it on the table so that he could take it off again.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that, again, fits in with the desperate search for optimism when you say if he's already done his worst to you, then why not fight back? Because he's retaliated. It's almost like attack being the best form of defence. Okay. Quite a few of you picking up on the irony of Lars telling us that the group in Denmark that is encouraging a boycott of American goods is being organised on Facebook, which is, of course, owned by Meta and Mark Zuckerberg. Robert in Devon probably puts it best when he points out that not only is there irony in the Danish group that you mentioned using Facebook to organise, but, of course, I am now contacting you via a Meta-owned company as well. So getting elements of this out of the UK economy, out of our daily interplay, out of public discourse, would be like getting the eggs out of a baked cake. But it doesn't mean it's not worth trying. And if you do something and not do everything, you have still done something. Which brings us back to Greta Thunberg, which Tim in Cardiff, I think cited first. That just because we can't fix the climate crisis single-handedly overnight doesn't mean we shouldn't all try our best to improve the situation. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 11 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Some other good news from these states involves an attempt by Elon Musk to buy a vote in Wisconsin, a vote for a seat on their Supreme Court. And he spent, I think, $21 million. There were even photographs of him giving $1 million checks to people and paying people to vote. And they lost. Susan Crawford won. The Democrat-backed judge won the key seat on the Wisconsin Supreme Court overnight, widely seen as a referendum on Donald Trump's administration. And of course, that will have huge ramifications when it comes to issues, including abortion. And I don't know that I've ever done a phone-in on why so many powerful men hate abortion. It's weird, right? And by powerful, I don't mean that as a compliment. I mean bullies, really. In the media as well. I'm always struck by the usually older or weirder men who really, really, really hate abortion. And no one loves it, by the way. It's not a pleasant experience for anybody. But my goodness me, it's the best available option in the circumstances when it is applicable. Forcing a woman to have a pregnancy and then a baby that she doesn't want is absolutely barbaric, and it's obviously barbaric. But I do have some insight into where opposition comes from, because I was educated by nuns and monks. And surprising though this may sound, I was, at the age of 14 or 15, I was very, very good at debating pro-choice people. I remember going to King's College in Wimbledon on one occasion and doing that. Do you know what my trick was? Have I ever told you what my tactic was in those debates? It was quite a weird one looking back, but it was very effective, but only because no one saw it coming. So if you were a schoolboy or a schoolgirl debater, then in the 1980s, abortion was a massive issue. It might be slightly hard to believe for younger people, but of course with the repeal of Roe versus Wade, it's come back round again. And the way that I used to win these debates, or at least the way in which I used to generate a collective intake of breath from the crowd, was because the people I was debating against, and I always liked to go last in debates, because then I could pick apart what other people had said. I didn't just have to stand up and deliver a pre-prepared speech. It's almost like I was preparing for this job. And what you would get is usually they'd say something like, and the opposition will tell you tales of back streets and wire coat hangers and disgusting images of, and they always played the same cards, and they usually worked. And then I would stand up and say something like, if abortion had been legal in Ireland in 1972, I would not be standing in front of you today. Now, it's not, earth-shattering in its impact. And of course, there's a perfectly reasonable case to be made that the world would be much better for not having me in it. But it was not something that people in sixth form debating societies in the 1980s were expecting to happen. A simple explanation of one of the silver linings, if you like, of state-sanctioned opposition to female bodily autonomy was that the Republic of Ireland had a booming export market in babies, women who either through their own, I don't want to say brainwashing, because that in many ways denigrates all religion, but women who had been led to the belief that even though they wouldn't be able to raise a baby, they should still have it, would then travel to the United Kingdom, travel to Great Britain actually, and give their babies up for adoption. So it was a interesting intervention on a debating level, and at the time I meant it. I want to make that absolutely clear. As a not thoughtless, but as a slightly self-centered male boy, I did mean it. I certainly felt I had the right to argue in that debating chamber against the provision of abortion. And I still do feel that I should have the right in that debating chamber to argue against the provision of abortion. I should be able on this radio station to argue against the provision of abortion. I don't want to anymore, but I do think it falls under the realms of free speech. However, there are places where you shouldn't be able to. Let's try and think if we can work out what those places are. Okay, so let's say that you are anti-abortion. And we're going to work out together the places where you shouldn't be able to espouse your position or publicly even hold or defend your position. And I've only got one. Out of all the places in all the world, there's only one place I can think of where you shouldn't be allowed to espouse your position, to hold your point. Okay? And that would be outside the facilities that women are going to, having thought long and hard about this process, having ideally accessed all sorts of counselling and contemplation and consideration. The one place in the country where you should not be allowed any freedom to hold your position against what that woman wants to do is the place where that woman is going to do what she wants to do. And I refuse, or rather I fail, to see how that is controversial. Just that one spot. Just that one place. J.D. Vance has told undiluted lies about what is going on in this country, claiming that people in Scotland had been sent letters warning them that they're not allowed to pray in their own homes. But we had a call yesterday from the States, from someone who was by no measure enamoured of Donald Trump, but who had also believed some of the lies about freedom of speech that have been popularised on the far right. There are two strands to it. There's the Farage riots, where the myth persists that people have been jailed for putting up memes, as opposed to being jailed for pleading guilty to crimes such as incitement. I'll say that first bit again, because apparently it's a bit hard for some people to understand. Pleading guilty to the crimes of which they have been accused, not one of which includes posting a meme on social media. And the second bit of the freedom of speech conversation that J.D. Vance has lied about, the Vice President of the United States of America, is it Captain Guyliner or Captain Eyeliner? I know it's childish, but we're all allowed a little bit of puerility in our lives. What do we prefer? What's funnier, Captain Eyeliner or Captain Guyliner? It's Captain Eyeliner, right? Yeah, it's Captain Eyeliner is funny. Sorry, that was crowdsourcing. And the second bit is abortion. Claims that people are having their freedom of speech curtailed when they are being subjected to exclusion orders. I'm also subject to them. I can't go along to an abortion clinic and comfort the women going in. I can't go there and say, hooray, you're definitely doing the right thing, even though I wouldn't exist if this freedom had been available to you in Ireland in 1972. I defend and applaud your right to access. So no one is allowed in these exclusion zones to do anything that might constitute harassment. And do you know what harassment is? Is it harassment or harassment? What do you say? Harassment. What do you say? You never use the word. Interesting. It is something that can cause harm. So you can harass someone by bombarding them with emails. You can harass someone on social media. And if you make a complaint about that, the police are compelled to investigate. But an exclusion zone simply says, in these areas, you can't do these things. I mean, I presume you can even stand on the edge. There's a place down by Tottenham Court Road. Would it be a Mary Stopes clinic? I'm not sure. And it used to chill my blood when I walked past, because they set up little camps. They got their deck chairs there, and they are there to. You can harass someone even if you're sort of claiming that you're praying, because you know that you are there to disapprove of what this woman is doing. I couldn't believe it. I found it this curious combination of funny and hideous. Funny because could you imagine coming up with the idea that that's what you were going to, what are you going to go and do today? I'm going to go and I'm going to take a flask of tea and a deck chair to a family planning clinic, and I'm going to, originally I'm going to really violently, verbally assault the young women that are going in there. I'm going to hold up pictures of fetuses, and I'm going to shout all sorts of abuse at them. I'm going to call them murderers. And the law moved in, and the law dialed it down, and it concluded that there are things you're not allowed. So is that an infringement of freedom of speech? So you can't stand outside an abortion clinic anymore and shout murderer at a teenage girl who's been raped. That's an appalling infringement of your freedom of speech. It's not, is it? So just think of it as a graph, right? And that was once permissible in this country, and it isn't anymore. And in order to make sure that the seal on this sort of behaviour is watertight, the graph has to go further than those violent and obnoxious examples, and it simply has to say, within this zone, nothing's allowed. Nothing that might constitute harassment of either the person accessing the facility or even the people who don't want anyone to access it. You're not allowed to harass them either. You can't go down there and tell the person who 10 years ago was shouting murderer at teenage rape victims, you can't go down there and tell them to sling their hook either. They shouldn't be there, but you're not allowed to harass them if they are. That's how I understand the exclusion zone to work. Which makes it slightly scary that the US liars are treating as a cause célèbre a woman who stands outside abortion clinics advertising phone numbers and telling that she's here to talk if you want, because she doesn't want people to have abortions. That is a violation of a public spaces protection order. It's before a magistrate's court, and I don't know what the verdict will be, but it is incredible that the Vice President of the United States, a country which is currently deporting entirely innocent people to foreign prisons and then saying, I'm terribly sorry, we made a mistake and we can't bring you back, is picking up on this issue. And perhaps inevitably, Kemi Badenoch has decided to join in. She had time, apparently, to get across this story, saying yesterday that she sided with Washington in a row over these protests. It should not be persecuting people for expressing themselves over abortion rights. She probably, and I wouldn't say this lightly, but she probably doesn't know that the exclusion order cuts both ways. She probably doesn't know that you're not allowed to go down there and counter-protest, because that's the point, you see. I'm only holding up my phone number and encouraging people to ring me. Yeah, but here's someone who passionately disapproves of what you're doing, and they're going to turn up tomorrow and shout you down or close you out, and then you have a public order situation. So how do you avoid public order situations outside family planning clinics? Answer, you don't let anybody there to opine or to espouse their position or to do anything that could be construed as harassment. And I don't understand what the problem is here. 16 minutes after 11. I don't think we can do another phone-in about what on earth Kemi Badenoch is playing at, because it's a bit like kind of trying to find sense in a blancmange. But the idea that free speech is at risk. If free speech is at risk when you do this, is it also at risk when you're shouting murder at a teenage rape victim? Because that is what these people believe, by the way. I know, because I was indoctrinated into that worldview at a very young age. So 0345 600973 is the number you need. I'm not going to say anything about the individuals involved in these cases, but a lot of the powerful men who get behind anti-abortion don't seem to like human beings, but they don't seem to like babies that have actually been born very much. If, for example, they're crossing the English Channel in a dinghy, or unfortunate enough to be hungry, or to have needs, or to have parents that aren't doing a great job of looking after them. These men don't often seem to care about humans who've actually been born, who actually exist, but the ones that don't exist yet, the ones who haven't been born, oh yes, they love the opportunity to show their compassion for them. So, is this in any way an infringement of free speech? 0345 6060 973. Has Kemi Badenoch lost the plot? But then again, we could ask that question every single day. Jonathan Reynolds has made mincemeat of the claim that it's going to affect trade talks. He's the actual business secretary, and he said it's not been part of the trade negotiations that I've been part of. And the question I've never asked you, why does a certain type of powerful man hate abortion so much? 0345 6060 973. Why do people like J.D. Vance, and I think Donald Trump pretends to, because it appeals to people that might support him or might vote for him. But when I was a kid and I thought I was anti-abortion, it was because of a very weird and very personal calculation. That if my biological mother had been able to have an abortion in Ireland in 1972, she probably would have done, and I wouldn't be here today. And I don't expect anybody else to feel bad about that, but you'll allow me to. I quite like being here today, you know. So that makes sense to me, that single one position. But of course it doesn't give me the right to tell anybody now, subsequently, that they're not allowed to do this thing. So why do certain men have such a big problem with abortion? 0345 6060973. And secondly, do you honestly think this is an assault upon freedom of speech? To have a tiny number of exclusion zones, as many exclusion zones as there are clinics, where you're not allowed to do something that you're free to do absolutely anywhere else in the country. All right? Freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequences. Is it opining, is it harassing, or is it just plain terrorizing? If you are a young woman and you are going into this clinic, I don't think you want to see anybody protesting anything, holding up any pamphlets, praying, doing anything at all. And you can do it wherever else you want. Anywhere else you want, you can't do it here. What is the problem? 0345 6060973. And what is going on with the men who hate abortion? Especially the ones that don't seem to abide by any other Christian doctrines. Well, there isn't a Christian doctrine on this one, who don't abide by any Christian doctrines whatsoever, but claim they have some sort of divine justification for their position on this one single issue. And thank you to Steve, who says, James, we all like you being here today. If only that were true, Steve. If only that were true.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:21 is the time. And free speech at risk in Britain, warns Kemi, as she backs US in row over abortion protests. This is not a conversation about Kemi Badenoch, although I think we've discovered in the months that she's been leader of the Conservative Party that the likelihood of her having a full grasp of whatever it is she's offering an opinion on is slim. Yesterday on this radio station, of course, she was offering up pungent opinions about a television programme she hadn't even watched and sharing misinformation that was the creation of sort of online racists. So she probably doesn't know what she's talking about. Yesterday's question about why are American politicians getting involved in stuff like this remains live, but let's make like it's 1988 and have a conversation about why people should or should not be allowed to mount any form of presence outside an abortion clinic. And to my mind, nonsense of the claim that it is an infringement of free speech to simply let women access this facility unmolested. Undisturbed is a better word. Undisturbed. Why can't they just go there undisturbed? Stephen's in Pinner. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Yes, hello. Good morning, James.
Hello.
Those women have got the absolute right to go to an abortion clinic undisturbed, to be able to walk in there and not have people looking at them, because they'll be judging them. They'll be standing there and they will be judging them for whatever reason. Now, this is very personal for me. My daughter had to have a termination last year. She chose to have a termination last year because the baby that she was carrying, and it was a much-loved, much-wanted baby, had no renal system, had no kidneys, no renal system. It had zero chance of surviving outside of the womb and would have died very, very soon after birth. And she was correct in her decision to terminate, because it would have meant she would have carried the baby through to full term and then lost it. And this would have been twice in a generation.
Right.
So she was already anxious about it. And she was petrified that she would end up walking past these people that would judge her for what she was doing.
It's such an odd way to spend your day, isn't it? I mean, I suppose on one level they think it's the most normal thing in the world, but when you just see it for a second through the eyes of someone like your daughter, this behaviour is monstrous.
Yeah, so, just give it a bit of thought about why those women are going to those clinics. It's not because their contraception has failed or a fella's not bothered to put a condom on or it can be a multitude of reasons. Just give it some thought.
Just give it some thought. And the idea that free speech is under assault if someone is not allowed to stand on in the environs of the clinic holding up a phone number and an invitation to have a conversation, or worse, but let's go for the mildest thing we can possibly find. And of course, the only time that the authorities would escalate the situation is if, having been asked to go away, you refuse. So again, it's not really I don't know. Is it an infringement of free speech on any level?
Our country it prides itself on free speech. So I suppose there is an element there that they should be able to make their point. But make your point in your church, make your point away from where these women are having to go through an awful procedure. I mean, my daughter's experience from start to finish, once she was told, it really was awful.
And of course, it's not just, we don't even need to make a list of places where you can do it, like churches and the rest. We can simply say everywhere else, literally everywhere else, even in the House of Commons, but just not there. Not on the pavement outside, not nearby, not where you are likely. Well, you're only there because you're hoping to encounter somebody who's going in. I just find it weird. Weirder and weirder the more I think about it. And of course, the other element of the conversation that is weird is why men who don't seem to be possessed of any Christian charity in every other area of their life, they don't really believe that poverty exists, or that if it does, it's the fault of the poor people. They're not really keen on humanity. They're often opposed to human rights, as in every blimmin' human on the planet based rights. But when it comes to abortion, they are very, very, very much on the side of the opposition. What's that about? What's going on? What is that mental or psychological position explained by? David is in the French Alps, it says here. How delightful. David, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Thanks for taking my call. I was saying to your researcher that, as far as I'm concerned, it's derived from an American psyche whereby people take things to the absolute extreme. And I think the idea of free speech, certainly as far as Americans are concerned, is it covers absolutely every facet of speech.
Well, except that they're locking people up now for writing op-eds for student newspapers in solidarity with Palestinian people. Exactly. There is no free speech on American campuses now.
No, exactly right, and that's the irony of where we are, and that's the sort of the populist angle on free speech. But in terms of when an average American talks about free speech, they seem to have it in their mind that it means you can do or say whatever you want to whoever you want, whenever you want, and however you want. Clearly, I think we as Europeans, on a slightly more liberal perspective, and having had free speech, whether actually in our constitutions or not, written down or not, for a good 500 years, maybe more, we see it as a more nuanced thing where you can go to a certain degree, but beyond that, if you start bigotry, hate...
that's, yes, I mean, or even harassment, and that's very much in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? So, what about my right, or what about this woman's right to access this facility undisturbed or unharassed? That's a big freedom. Her freedom to do that under our law is clear, but it needs protecting, and you protect it by removing people who threaten it, by removing people who refuse to leave the area, which is what the woman in the case J.D. Vance has cited specifically reportedly did. The court heard, it's a magistrate's court, so we can talk about it, heard that she was approached by police and a council official who told her that one woman had felt harassed. Now, at that point, you would, I imagine, well, most people would think, oh, gosh, that's terrible. But to reject the request to move along, to reject the fixed penalty notice, is to welcome the news that a woman has felt harassed by your behaviour, by your presence. A woman doing something which I think our first caller explained in such poignant terms is going to be very harrowing and very difficult very often.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the woman herself, personally, whilst the actual little notification she put up, I'm happy to talk, sounds all very innocent, and there's an innocent argument used by many people for it. I was saying to a researcher, I don't see that as any different to coercive control. It's a subtle little gesture done by a husband to a wife. This is a subtle little gesture that can put enormous amounts of pressure on people who are in an extremely difficult position.
That's a really good point. I don't know if it's the correct term to use, but like a microaggression, or no, it's not the right term. Yours is fine. It's a subtle little gesture that has a much, much bigger impact than it initially appears to have, and that might be why some men love it. Some men love the anti-abortion position because it gives them dominion, if you like, over women's bodies. You think of the sexual revolution and the power that contraception gave to women to not be slaves, if you like, for want of a better word, to their own fertility. And I guess a certain type of man hates that. I wonder how tightly tied it is to the tradwife movement in America. I wonder where the tradwife movement in America, in the United States, stands on the question of abortion. I suspect it stands on the celebrating the repeal of Roe versus Wade side of the argument, but I could be wrong. It's 11:30. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We're still trying to make contact with our contact in Ramallah about this story that has gathered a little bit of pace overnight, but which I referred you to yesterday. This is reports that some of the bodies of 15 Palestinian paramedics and rescue workers killed by Israeli forces and buried in a mass grave 10 days ago in Gaza were found with their hands or legs tied and had gunshot wounds to the head and chest. That's according to 2 witnesses. We're still trying to make contact with our contact over there in the hope of finding out a little more about that story. So please don't think for a minute that we've taken our eye off the ball. 11:30 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33 minutes after 11 is the time. The big speech on tariffs is due at 9 o'clock our time this evening. Ian Dale is on air at that time, of course, and he will be taking it in its entirety and then providing you with some expert analysis immediately afterwards. I don't think it's possible to exaggerate the potential importance of the moment. I don't know if you heard Lionel Barber in an earlier news bulletin today, and Lionel knows what he's talking about. Former editor of the Financial Times, one of the finest journalists of his generation, and describing it potentially as a second US revolution. The upending of almost a century of norms for reasons that remain somewhat unclear, and to which the best answer I've been able to provide to anybody when they ask why is he doing it, to which the answer is because he can. Why do psychopathic children pull the wings off butterflies? Because they can. Why do they torture pet cats? Because they can. Why is he imposing tariffs upon his allies? Because he can. He can hurt them, he can reduce them, and then we'll have to wait and see what happens next, because he doesn't know any more than you do. But you can find out what is in the package, in the speech, what the detail of the tariffs will be at 9 p.m. this evening. That's our time, live on LBC. 2 stories, really, from the Middle East that demand our attention this morning. The first I referred you to a moment ago. The second, of course, is announcements by the Israeli government that they intend to take control of more of Gaza. So the worst possible predictions of Benjamin Netanyahu's critics have now almost all come true. Impossible, I think, to reject the term ethnic cleansing in that context. And increasingly, of course, people are choosing to use the word genocide as well. But it is to the first story that I want to turn your attention first. 2 witnesses now describing the bodies of 15 Palestinian paramedics and rescue workers killed by Israeli forces 10 days ago in Gaza. 2 witnesses describing that some of those bodies were found with their hands or legs tied and had gunshot wounds to the head and chest. Nebal Farsakh is a spokesperson for the Palestine Red Crescent Society and joins us now from Ramallah. I know this is a slightly silly question, Nebal, but for some of my listeners, we'll be introducing themselves to the detail for the first time. So can you just run us through the circumstances that led up to the killings 10 days ago?
Good morning, and thanks for having me. The Palestine Red Crescent is devastated by the killing of 8 medics of my colleagues who were killed while performing their humanitarian duties. This makes up the total number of PRCS members who have been killed while wearing the Red Crescent emblem to 27 PRCS staff and volunteers were killed in the Gaza Strip since October 2023. We received a call for help for injured civilians after a home was bombed. So an ambulance or 2 ambulances were dispatched to the same incident. One of the ambulances managed to get to the location and transport the casualties to the hospital, but the other ambulance, which was dispatched from a different ambulance station, did not come back. So the connection was lost, and then we asked the other ambulance to go and check on their colleagues on their ambulance station because they were not picking up their phones. On the road, they found the PRCS ambulance, and the doors were open, and there was a number of casualties on the ground injured, including our staff. They called for help and asked the dispatch to send more ambulances to help transporting and evacuating the wounded, including the staff. And it turns out that even the 2 ambulances who were dispatched later to save their lives, they also came under heavy gun fire, as one paramedic was over the line with the dispatcher. We heard a heavy gunfire, and then later we heard sound of Israeli soldiers in the location talking to each other before the line was completely lost. And this is the team member who is still missing up to this moment, as out of the 10 paramedics who were responding, 10 PRCS paramedics, one colleague is still missing, and we believe he might be arrested. Other colleague was released in the same day, and he is the only survivor from the ambulance team. He is the only survivor. He was at the first ambulance who went missing and tried to check on them, and he confirmed that a heavy gunfire, they were subjected to a heavy Israeli gunfire, and both colleagues who were in the front of the ambulance were injured or killed. He didn't tell because he laid on the ground, and after the heavy gunfire, Israeli soldiers opened the ambulance and took him out of the ambulance, assaulted him before releasing him. This is so horrific. We can't even find the words to describe what happened. And what is more horrific is the circumstances when we discovered their bodies. It is a mass grave, and all of the bodies were put all together. It looks like a bulldozer took all of the bodies and put them on a deep hole and covered them with sands. It was really hard to recognize our colleagues from their faces because many bodies were start decomposing and they were all full with sand.
How was it found, Nebal? I mean, was it a coincidence, or was it being searched for?
For over a week, we tried to guarantee safe access for the staff to go and search for our missing teams. And this is what was made in coordination by the ICRC and UN agencies, especially OCHA. And Israeli forces were refusing to give safe access for the staff to go and rescue team to go and search for our missing teams, where we didn't tell what happened to them. And then after a while, or 2 days before we completely find all the bodies, we got an access. And then we managed to find one civil defense staff member body. And then they asked us to move from the area. Later, we tried to guarantee access, but there wasn't, we didn't get it. And finally, when we had the access, the Israeli forces themselves give coordinates for the place where we can find all the bodies. And then the rescue teams were there and dig into this whole, try to retrieve the bodies until we found all the bodies in a very inhuman way.
Well, I'm struck by your obvious shock and horror, even though that within the context of what has gone before, this stands out as a particularly egregious event. If you could talk us through the significance of the witnesses describing hands and feet of some of the killed colleagues apparently being tied together.
All of them almost had multiple gunshots, some in the chest, some in the head, and one of our colleagues, his hands and legs were tied to his body. We saw this for one of our colleagues and also another staff from the civil defense. His hands or legs were tied. It is absolutely a horrific attack at our staff, and it is the largest number we have lost in a single incident. We have lost 8 paramedics in a single incident, and it is, I can't even find a word, because we know that the first ambulance team came under heavy gunfire, and we hear this from our released colleagues who confirm that they came under heavy gunfire on their way to save wounded people in Rafah after their home was bombed. You can't even imagine how this will happen while a ambulances and first responders and emergency medical service providers should be protected under international humanitarian law. They are being targeted under ways to save lives. The first ambulance confirmed this. The second ambulance also, we received a call from the second ambulance who went to search for the first one. And we got a call from one of the paramedics. He mentioned the same thing, heavy Israeli gunfire. All of the staff members were injured, and then the line was disconnected. We could not tell what happened. So we can't even imagine what were their last moments like. It is so horrific how much they bleed before they die. The scene itself, it is absolutely horrific. And we continue to call for justice for the victims. We continue to call the international community to take serious measures to protect humanitarians and medical personnel, as we should be protected under international humanitarian law. This is not acceptable. We also call for accountability and call for immediate investigation. We need immediate investigation to ensure justice for the victims, and we also call to know information about our missed colleagues. We need to know what happened to him, as his body was not found, and we believe he might be arrested.
So he might be held by the Israeli forces at the moment?
This is what we think, especially that last thing we have heard when he was over the phone with us, Israeli soldiers talking in Hebrew to each other and to him. And then the line was missed, and he is the only one. We could not find his body. Gosh. So most probably he might be arrested. And we need the answer now. We need to know what happened, and we need to learn his fate, as his family still waiting for answers, and his colleagues too.
You will know this, but the IDF has not responded to questions about the reports that bodies and vehicles had been buried, or to the allegations that some appeared to have been shot after being detained, and without any evidence. I want to make that absolutely clear. Without any evidence at all, they have claimed that Hamas fighters and other militants had been using the ambulances for cover. How hopeful can you be, given how hard it is for journalists and other outsiders even to get into the territory? How hopeful can you be of ever seeing the justice that you described, Nebal?
I am not hopeful at all, to be honest, because I have been calling for justice for over a year, and the Palestine Red Crescent for over a year has called the international community to protect our medical personnel. And what happened? Nothing. Instead of having justice for all the victims we have lost already, we added more names to our list of colleagues, volunteers who were killed while wearing the Red Crescent emblem. And this time, the loss was unimaginable. 8 colleagues in the same incident. And this makes the number, as I said, to 27 colleagues who were killed while wearing the Red Crescent emblem. I can't even imagine how this happened. It's not acceptable. Paramedics and the humanitarians are not safe in Gaza. And we see this over and over again. And unfortunately, we still hear the same ridiculous narrative accusing ambulances and doctors and everyone to be whatever, Hamas fighters or whatever. This is not acceptable. And the Palestine Red Crescent is part of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. We believe in humanity, neutrality, and serving the people and be to their side at the very tough moments. Our role is to save lives. And instead of being given a safe access, we are being targeted repeatedly. Not a single incident, which is a great proof that this is a systematic targeting. Our hospitals were bombed, 2 PRCS ambulances, 2 PRCS hospitals were attacked. Our ambulances were also targeted repeatedly. And this makes the number of our ambulances who were damaged or destroyed because of the Israeli forces, to almost 34 ambulances being taken out of service because of the continuous Israeli attacks. This need to be stopped, and the international community should take serious measures to protect civilians, humanitarians, and aid workers.
Nebal Farsakh, thank you. A spokesperson for the Palestine Red Crescent Society and a colleague, as she explained so powerfully of many of the dead. And I'm struck personally by Nebal's inability, sounds like the wrong word, to find the words to describe how this incident is, even by the standards of recent incidents, so shocking. But she's not alone, because some of the coverage I was reading this morning included some quotes from a spokesperson for the UN Aid Coordination Office, OCHA, O-C-H-A, called Jens Lercher, and he said, normally we are not at a loss for words. We are spokespeople, but sometimes we have difficulty finding them. This is one of those cases. So I'm particularly grateful to Nebal for finding the words that she found. It's 11:49.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:52 is the time. It has nothing to do with abortion. I told you this yesterday. It's just my personal theory. I can't prove it. But today I learned that the US State Department has challenged Ofcom, Britain's communications regulator, over freedom of expression, specifically new online safety laws. How do you get people behind your attempts to protect yourself from getting into trouble for posting blatant lies, incitements, really dangerous misinformation? Well, you persuade enough people that it's not an attack on blatant lies, misinformation, incitements, racism and the rest of it. It's an attack on free speech, or it's an attack on personal freedom. That's what J.D. Vance is playing at when he complained about infringements on free speech in the UK. It's what Elon Musk is playing at. He, of course, would be hit harder by many over proper attempts to regulate what happens on his own platform. People who stoked the Farage riots last summer did so on his platform, X. It also hosts accounts by figures like little Tommy Ten Names and Andrew Tate, who also stood accused of inciting Islamophobic protests over the course of the summer. So what could Elon Musk possibly be worried about with regards to the Online Safety Act? You're not going to win many friends when you say publicly, I want to continue to be free to platform incitements. But you might win some if you say freedom of speech is compromised, which is why they use these cause célèbres of strange people, in my humble opinion, who hang around outside abortion clinics trying to disturb the young women going in. Aisha is in Glasgow. Aisha, what made you pick up the phone?
So, good morning, James.
Hello.
I think it's still morning. Oh, yeah, still morning. So, basically, I don't know if you can tell by the name, but I am of the Islamic faith. I'm a Muslim, I follow the Islamic faith. Okay. Now, Glasgow has a few hospitals, but the main hospital in Glasgow is the Queen Elizabeth, which is based in the south side of the city.
Yeah.
Now, in October 2021, I was very excited, as I was expecting, and I went to the maternity hospital is connected to the main hospital and the children's hospital, so it's like 3 campuses really in one. And one of the main entrances is where there is always anti-abortion protesters. There's always there, and it's right outside the maternity hospital, which is where...
Still now as well? Is the law different in Scotland?
Well, I know... I think we were the kind of main ones to start off with the buffer zones.
Yes.
The Scottish Government, I think, were one of the main... we were one of the first to kind of implement the buffer zones, but they weren't in place in 2021.
Oh, okay.
So, as I was going into hospital, I was thinking, I was going from a 12-week scan to get in to see, okay, it's a dating scan to see how the baby is,
it's a big
very
one.
excited. A big one, right? It's the main big one, right? So I went in, I saw the protesters, and I just kind of, rolled my eyes, and my grandfather was with me because my husband was away for work.
Yeah.
So my grandfather was with me. We went in to the place where you get your scan, the ultrasound department. Went in for my scan. The nurse was looking at me, the ultrasound technician was looking, and she's like, I need to go get another doctor. And I thought, all right, okay, but I could see the baby, on the screen moving, and I was like, all right, okay. And I was like, oh, I wonder what it is. She goes, maybe she was just a trainee or something.
Yeah.
So then she brought in another nurse, And she's like, I'm really sorry. And I went, oh, and I thought, if the baby can't be like dead, because I could see the baby moving. She goes, there's actually 2 babies.
Oh.
And I went, all right. And she goes, but they're actually joined.
Conjoined.
They're conjoined. They were conjoined at the head and the chest. She goes, so we need to get you over to fetal medicine, which is another department. It's for like, you know, children in utero that are really ill or they have like kind of complications. So my life crashed like within a minute. I had to go over to fetal medicine the same day, like within 5 minutes I went to fetal medicine. A doctor came, like within 5 minutes I went to fetal medicine. A doctor came in, a specialist. She did another scan and she goes, I'm really sorry. The babies are conjoined, and looking at them, they only share one set of organs between them. They're joined at the head. They are not, because they're not viable.
Yeah.
They're not viable for life. And that was like literally my life within 5 minutes. My whole life came crashing down. And these are very much wanted babies.
Of course.
And I said to the doctor, like, what is the options? Like, what is going to happen? And she said, we recommend a medical termination. Because these babies, they might not survive the full length of pregnancy. If they do, they won't survive outside of pregnancy. You can get very, very ill, because if something happens inside and we don't know about it, like you could get sepsis, you could die, and all these things. And obviously I struggled with that.
Of course.
Because
you've put me in a terrible situation, because this is such a harrowing story. But we have got PMQs on the horizon, which we have to take live. So I just steer you back very gently, if I may, to the protesters and the impact they had on you, having found yourself in a situation where you had no choice but to have a termination.
So obviously it was very raw. So everything happened really fast. I had to get in, taken, and they go, I agreed with medical termination because I consulted like my local imam, and he said, yes, because you're a mother, you're the highest regarded, you need to do that. And it was literally within a week I had to have, like, because the babies were over 12 weeks, I had to deliver them. So it wasn't like, you know, a usual D&C. And it just really hit me hard, like coming in the day for the procedure to give birth to these children that I wanted, that were passed away, that were not viable for life, to have these people standing trying to force their beliefs on other people, and half the time they just don't understand, like, are these people, do they foster children that are born that are in the system? Have they adopted any children? And I'm just thinking, if it was the shoe was on the other foot, if it was people of my faith who were sitting protesting, trying to put on ours, like,
it would
Tommy
be
10
reported
names,
rather differently. Oh, it's just silent prayer.
Tommy 10 names would be like everything, like, Islamic, exciting, they're putting on.
And yet these people do it to everybody. Every woman trying to access this service becomes fair game. I'm so sorry I had to hurry you, Aisha, but I think we got the full impact of what you went through, and why these people, whatever they're doing, if they seek to disturb women in a position like yours, they should be simply excluded from those environs. And you don't arrest them first time. You ask them nicely to move along. And if they refuse, then they face the law. And just penalty notices, just a fine. But hey-ho, Captain Eyeliner, J.D. Vance, thinks that this is going to be a wedge point that he can use to sow division in this country, and there'll be British politicians who join in. And it is to British politicians we turn now. Natasha Clark can give us a very, very, very quick, a record-breakingly quick account of what she thinks is going to come up at PMQs today.
Good afternoon. Just. It's obviously a bit of a strange day for us, as we're all waiting for what might happen with Donald Trump and those tariffs a little bit later today. So it's going to be a bit of a holding pattern, PMQs today, I think. And this is the last one before recess. You'll be either delighted or upset to know. This is obviously the first one as well since the spring statement last week. So I wonder if Kemi Badenoch will like to put the boot in like she did at that press conference earlier this week, where she was talking about some new analysis the Conservatives have done showing people are going to be worse off as a result of this budget. The Labour Party and, of course, Keir Starmer will tell you that you're going to be £500 better off as a result of this spring statement. But I think all for April, the cost of living crisis, tariffs are all going to come up at some point in this Prime Minister's questions. The free speech row, of course, one that Kemi Badenoch has lent in when she spoke to our colleague Nick Ferrari earlier this week, saying that she does feel that free speech in this country is under threat. And again, it all feeds into this idea.
That won't come up today, will it?
Probably not, but it has been a sort of topic of conversation, I think, for a lot of people about this abortion campaigner and the idea that the American administration, putting out such a statement as they did earlier this week, leaning into British domestic politics in this way, really interesting. I wonder if we'll see that come up from any backbench MPs.
Yes, I mean, it is really interesting, and it is most definitely not independent of their unhappiness about the Online Safety Act and restrictions on what you would be able to host on an online platform in the event of this becoming law. But I'm not sure everybody realises the close relationship between those two things. Duties in relation to misogynistic content are voluntary, unlike the requirements to tackle illegal content and child safety is the current state of affairs. Any left field suggestions? Anything that might...
Heathrow, perhaps? The aftermath of the Heathrow boss has been in court today.
That on Starmer?
Potentially. You could just
pin
say
anything on Starmer.
You could pin anything.
If the wind is behind
he's the leader of the government.
Yes.
Maybe VAT in court as well. That might be a Kemi Badenoch pet project that might be popping up again. That is a policy which they feel has some legs to run. That's obviously coming up in court at the moment. So that could be something that will come up for them. Smartphones as well. I feel like we're getting a bank now of Kemi Badenoch friendly questions that I now reach to. The Kemi Badenoch levers that I feel that she is now more confident in pulling. Things like smartphones, things like schools, things like the cost of living. I think that she's getting stronger at figuring out which topics I think work in Prime Minister's questions, work against Keir Starmer. And I think there are a bunch of topics that she can reach for. But like I say, it could be a bit of take out the trash day.
Wait and see pie. 2 minutes after 12, of course, it is Wednesday, which means, and it is not currently recess. How long are they off for? 2 weeks?
I think it's 2 weeks, yeah.
We will cross live to the House of Commons as soon as the Leader of the Opposition gets to her feet. Do you think adolescence will come up again?
Potentially, and obviously
Starmer might raise it.
Yeah, because he's obviously been the one that's been getting Home Affairs ministers together this week with this migration summit. He announced that.
Here we go. Let's find out.
Mr. Speaker, the triple lock was a Conservative policy. Rather than...
Hold on. I know. You was inadvertently said. Carry on, Lee.
Rather than the Prime Minister congratulating himself for what we did, why don't we talk about what he's doing? Yes. From Sunday, Labour's jobs tax will mean many British businesses face a terrible choice to cut wages, put up prices, or sack their staff. Yeah. What is the Prime Minister's advice to those businesses?
Well, Mr. Speaker, she says the triple lock was Conservative policy. It was once thought to be the party of sound finances, but they blew all of that. Mr. Speaker, she asked what we're doing. We're clearing up the mess that they left. We're dealing with global instability, and we recognise the pressures that are bearing down on businesses and individuals and working people. That's why we're rolling up our sleeves. And yesterday, Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to announce the national living wage increasing by £1,400. That's a pay rise for millions of workers. We've announced £150 for the Warm Homes discount, extended now to 6 million households. That's 1 in 5 families. And wages are going up faster than prices. And never forget, the party opposite, worst living standards on record, inflation up to 11%, public services left on their knees.
Mr. Speaker, the only mess is the one that he made with his budget. They had an emergency budget last week that fixed nothing. He says he's bringing stability. All we see is fragility. During the election, the Prime Minister also promised that he would not increase taxes on working people. But even the OBR says that the jobs tax will be passed on to workers. Yep. On average, families will be £3,500 poorer. Yep. Why should anyone trust him again?
Prime Minister. Well, a fantasy figure is about as much use as Liz Truss's economic planning. And she turns up every week to carp from the sidelines about the decisions we made at the budget. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, she held a press conference and she couldn't say whether she would reverse the decisions that we made at the budget. Now, I understand, because she can't bring herself to say that she doesn't want the investment of an extra £26 billion in our NHS. I'm not surprised at that. That's 2 million extra appointments, that's 1,000 more GPs, a pay rise for nurses, etc., etc. But let me get her position right if I can follow it. She wants the extra £26 billion in the NHS, Mr. Speaker, that was paid for by the national insurance rise. She wants that. She doesn't want to reverse the national insurance rises. So she's now reduced this absurd position of voting against the budget, carping against a budget that she actually agrees with.
Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with making people poorer. I don't agree with pensioner poverty. I don't agree. Out there, they are calling it awful April. That's because of decisions he has made, because he made promises and broke them. His promises are worthless, Mr. Speaker. Yes. People are getting poorer. Yes. Before the election, he pledged to freeze council tax. Instead, it's going up everywhere. Even in Birmingham, where there's 17,000 tons of rubbish uncollected on the streets. Does the Prime Minister regret promising the British people he would freeze their council tax when he has so obviously failed?
Prime Minister? Well, I have to ask, if she doesn't want people to be poorer, why didn't she resign when she was in government? Mr. Speaker, the last government put up council tax for 12 years in a row. She, I think, was actually Minister for Council Tax. And in the year she's been, what she do? She put it up. And even now, the Conservatives' own Local Government Association manifesto, so currently their position, page 9, we asked the government to remove the caps on council tax. So who's leading the charge? Hampshire County Council, they wanted a 15% hike, we said no. Slough Council wanted a hike, we said no. Windsor and Maidenhead was Tory, now Lib Dem, they wanted a hike and we said no. And it's no surprise that council tax is £300 cheaper under Labour councils than under Tory councils.
Mr. Speaker, he doesn't want to talk about Birmingham, and that's because he knows the situation. So I'll say it again. 17,000 tons of rubbish on Birmingham streets. Yeah. Normally, a state of emergency is called for natural disasters, not Labour ones. Yeah. His policies have left our economy dangerously fragile. The Chancellor, once again, left herself no room for manoeuvre. Economic experts, real economists, say she will either have to break her fiscal rules or put up taxes. Which will it be?
Prime Minister. I think she must have picked up the script she was using a few weeks ago. Because it was only then she was saying, in the spring statement, you're going to put up taxes. But look, Mr. Speaker, in relation to the situation in Birmingham, it is completely unacceptable. I fully support the Council in declaring it a major incident to resolve the situation, and we'll put in whatever additional support is needed. But when the party opposite was in government, we lost more days to strike action than in any year since the 1980s. NHS workers were on the picket line, not on the front line, and that sent waiting lists through the roof, so we'll take no lectures on industrial harmony from them.
Mr. Speaker, the whole House would have heard that he didn't say whether or not he could keep his fiscal rules. That means that it's either that or putting up taxes. 9 months ago, we left Labour the fastest growing economy in the G7. We did. And I remember watching his MPs laughing at their first destructive budget. They've had another one that has made our economy dangerously vulnerable. The Bank of England says his policies have pushed up the cost of living for families. Does he disagree with the bank, or does he accept his policies mean higher bills?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, she must be the only person left in the country who actually thinks they did well on the economy when they were in power. That was what was tested at the last election. Living standards, the worst on record. Inflation, 11% it soared up to. The NHS on its knees. Oh, Mr. Speaker, she's so obsessed with talking down the country that she's not read the OBR forecast properly. Growth up in 2026, 2027 up, 2028 up, 2029 up. And thanks to our planning reforms, the largest growth measure the OBR have ever costed. A And what did the Tories do when the bill came before Parliament? They abstained. Well, you don't grow the economy or build houses by yourself. They're the same old party. They haven't changed. Nothing's new.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about inflation. We left it at 2%. It is now twice what the OBR forecast when we were in government. The fact is, his decisions have made our economy fragile, just as we face global trade wars. In November, I urged him to seize the draft US trade deal Conservatives negotiated. Instead, Mr. Speaker, he lost our most experienced trade negotiator. It's no wonder he can't get a tariff deal for British cars. On this side of the House, we secured investments for that industry. £600 million from BMW, £2 billion from Nissan, £4 billion from Jaguar Land Rover. Labour's record is a car industry in crisis, even before tariffs. There are 25,000 more jobs now at risk. He says he's preparing for eventualities. Can the Prime Minister tell us exactly what he is doing to protect the British car industry from his failure to negotiate?
We're taking a calm, pragmatic approach and keeping our feet on the ground. There are constructive talks that are ongoing on a wider economic prosperity deal with the US. That is really important at this moment. We are working with all sectors that are likely to be impacted, and we're guided by our national interest at all times. And that's why we've said we won't rule anything out. But it is important at a moment like this that we don't have knee-jerk reactions, that we are actually cool-headed about this, and that's why we won't rule anything out. But she must be. She's the Trade Secretary. She was the Trade Secretary, Mr. Speaker, who failed to get a trade deal with the US.
Mr. Speaker, today the Trump administration will announce new tariffs that will hurt working people in the US and around the world. Would the Prime Minister agree with me that at a time when big tech has grown fat by corrupting our politics and preying on young people, that the wrong approach would be to pander to his bullying tactics and detect millionaires in his imperial court by cutting the digital services tax? Can he assure the public that the poorest won't get cuts while the richest get a free ride?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank her for raising this. It is an important issue, and there are issues in relation to Northern Ireland in particular that we have to deal with very carefully. We will, Mr. Speaker, always put the national interest first, and that's why I'm pleased that talks are ongoing and they're constructive talks. I do believe that a trade war is in nobody's interest, and all of the sectors and industries impacted are of the same view. So we'll continue to make that progress in the national interest.
The Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the earlier remarks of the Prime Minister, particularly about Myanmar and Thailand? And can I support the aid that is going, and hope that despite the budget cuts we can be as generous as possible because of the humanitarian crisis there? Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has shown commendable leadership over Ukraine with his plan for a military coalition of the willing against Putin. Will he now provide similar leadership with an economic coalition of the willing against Trump's tariffs for free trade, so we can avoid a global trade war and a global recession?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think every week he tries to tempt me to make what I think is a false choice between our relationship with the US and our relationship with other countries, particularly Europe. I think that's the wrong choice on defence, on security intelligence, for reasons that we've rehearsed across this chamber. I also think it's wrong on trade and the economy. We have a good deal of trade, a balanced trade relationship with the US, and I believe that our interests are best served by calmly trying to secure a deal which is in our national interest, whilst at the same time preparing and leaving all options on the table.
Sir Ed Davey.
Minister's reply, I hope he is able to cut a deal, but I increasingly fear that the deal won't be good enough to avoid a global trade war. That's why I think one of the options must be to work with our European allies, our Commonwealth allies and others, because we don't tackle Trump's tariffs, we could be saying goodbye to free trade for a generation. Mr. Speaker, if I may turn to a domestic matter now. 3 years ago, the American private equity firm KKR bought a 25% stake in Northumbrian Water. Since then, people across the northeast have seen their water bills soar, whilst in the last year alone, Northumbrian Water has dumped nearly 1 million tonnes of raw sewage into Durham's Whitburn Coast Conservation Area. KKR are now poised to buy into Thames Water because ministers have ruled out a special administration regime. Can the Prime Minister guarantee that Thames Water will not be allowed to repeat the same trick of putting up bills and dumping raw sewage at the same time? They allowed it, he shouldn't.
Mr. Speaker, in relation to his comments at the beginning of the question, I really do think it's not sensible to say the first response should be to jump in to a trade war with the US. That cannot be the first response of the United Kingdom, and I will resist his urgings to do that. In relation to water, he's absolutely right to point out the appalling record on water of the party opposite, just like your record on everything was appalling, and that's why I'm really pleased that we passed the Water Act already to take the necessary measures, but we will go further.
Deputy.
Yesterday, the work and pension
the time is approaching 12:18, and PMQs, at least the main thrusts of PMQs, now have come to an end. I was sort of quietly congratulating myself then on the fact that the programme over the last 2 days has completely accurately reflected the major concerns of the moment as identified during PMQs, up to and including the question from the Northern Irish member about these tech bros, or whatever we should call them, these plutocrats, exerting unnecessary and unwanted influence on our democratic discourse. And then Natasha and Eleanor joined forces to poo-poo me and point out that everyone's been talking about those things anyway, so I don't know why you're giving yourself a special pat on the back. I just wanted you to share my pain.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 12. Thank you, David. The Northern Irish MP I referred to there was Claire Hanna, the member for Belfast South and Middown, the SDLP member for Belfast South and Middown. I've got a couple of great guests coming up for you. One in the world of entertainment and one in the world of deadly serious politics. Imagine if you were making a film about espionage, about Russia's assassination machine, and halfway through making the film, you discovered that you, in the case of the main contributor, or your main contributor, in the case of the director, were actually on a Russian kill list. You were actually making a programme about Russian kill lists with someone who you didn't realise when you started making the programme was essentially on a Russian kill list. That is precisely what happened to the two guests that I will have for you in the next part of the programme. And then in the world of entertainment, I just thought it was important to talk about a TV programme that wasn't adolescence. See, these are the hits I take for you. These are the little constant mental machinations that I'm indulging in to look after you. And one of the best shows I've seen in the last few years, for reasons that, are quite difficult to explain, but I'll have a go, is Borders. An incredibly funny comedy about 5 black teenagers being removed from quite a difficult inner city scenario into a school that was very like mine, except that it had girls in it, into a posh school. David Lawrence Taylor is the genius behind that programme, and he will be joining us in the next half an hour as well. But before all of that, Natasha Clark is here, and it wasn't a vintage episode of PMQs.
No, it's a bit meh. It's okay. Last one before recess, so trying to tick off as many topics as possible.
Yes, and I know that you and Eleanor felt that I was speaking out of turn when I pointed out that we'd correctly circled the same territory with our topic selection today. But it is, I think, interesting that Starmer has elected not to do what the EU is doing, not to talk about retaliation, and instead, for the time being at least, to try to have his cake and eat it, to try and keep the door open to a deal, even with someone as unpredictable and unhelpful as Donald Trump, and describe it as pragmatism, as taking it, as keeping calm.
Yeah, and we'll see what approach works soon enough, won't we? Because we saw what happened with Canada when, they doubled down and Donald Trump eventually did back off on escalating that tariff war. Is that the approach that's going to happen with the EU? Or is Keir Starmer's approach with, trying to appease Donald Trump the safer way to go? And, you're talking about your original point about the tech bros and who we're sort of appeasing to, aren't we? Let's be honest, by having these discussions about digital services tax and what might impact them and what might not. Is that an appeasement, or is it worth it to avoid crippling tariffs? Both? Well, it can be both, yeah.
That's totally the thing, that we're so used to quite binary politics.
Yeah, but is it worth it?
Yeah.
I think, potentially to save 22,000 jobs, billions of pounds being wiped off the economy, a 1% hit to our GDP, is it worth it? And I think, potentially, yeah.
And that is where we move into Mussolini made the trains run on time territory. How bad does a regime have to be before you do not brook any question of breaking bread or doing deals with them, which is why today's topic selection was so good. So I can't believe that you and Eleanor were poo-pooing.
No, it was a great topic selection.
Thank you.
Well done.
Yeah.
But,
traitor.
Like everyone.
See, she's hung you out to dry, Eleanor.
That's not true. I'm very much on Eleanor's side in
so
all
what
matters.
Else? What else came up today?
But yeah, look, national insurance, awful April bills, tariffs, trade, Birmingham council tax, fiscal rules, inflation, trade deals, lots of topics trying to cover. Like I say, I think Kemi Badenoch is quite strong when she goes on the economy because they've got a bit of a better record to sell a little bit at the end of their time, that inflation down, economy slightly on the up, but now looks like inflation's going to tick up again, looks like growth is going to be on the floor again, and the string of bills that are going up in April, that is going to be a problem for Keir Starmer when he heads into these local elections, because people, as we know, tend to vote with their wallets, and if people are feeling worse off in the next couple of weeks, it's really going to hammer Labour at the polls. And I think it was going to hammer Labour at the polls anyway, but I think it's going to be even worse. Than
the harder they're hit, the harder the hammer. Although Tim in Stourbridge is at great pains to point out, quite correctly, I think, that this repetition of points about the fastest growing G7 economy is contingent upon it having risen from the lowest point in the G7. So in percentage terms, if you grow from 10 to 100, that's 1,000% growth. But if you start at 50 and then grow to 100, that's only 100% growth. So you can claim that you've got the fastest growth in the Johnson used to do this all the time. But in fact, it's because you're coming at it, especially after the pandemic, from the lowest point of all your rivals in that grouping as well.
I'll revise down my comments that she had a good legacy to it was the best legacy that one of the only legacies the Conservative Party can draw from 14 years in office, that they can point to and go, wasn't that bad. I think there's few of those levers that she can pull, and every week we hear her trying to batter Keir Starmer over the head with some point or other, but there's very few things she can reach to the Conservative record to say, well, actually it was all right, and that was one of the ones that's okay.
And every week we come back to the same question of how effectively and for how long can Keir, regardless of accuracy, because it's correct when he points it out, how often can he point to the inheritance? How often can he point to what I mean, everywhere really, from the NHS to the police and everywhere in between. How often can he point out that they're trying to, what's the phrase? The black hole. Didn't used this week. Mick's playing a drinking game. He's still stone cold sober. He didn't get a single shot this week.
Does it count if we say
the black hole? He wants us to he wants us to join in
on
the drinking game, but I think that's against Ofcom rules.
What about with tea? Is it fun with tea?
But yes, maybe. How long does it? Yeah, I mean, that's the question, isn't it? And does it work with the electorate?
I think
how long are their memories?
I spoke to someone in government earlier today who agrees that is a topic that resonates with the public, the idea of the terrible inheritance. And actually, it works in some departments better than others. Like, for example, the DWP, you can point to them and say, well, actually, under the Tories, the welfare bill spiralled, and now we're having to clear that mess up. And I think that's an argument that hasn't really been made enough about these welfare cuts, right? Because you're able to blame the last government for making it so that more people than ever are claiming these benefits than ever before. And should be very easy to blame the last government. But the person I was speaking to also said that the British public are more impatient than they've potentially ever been before, and that there's not enough time for them to do things, and to do things at the speed that they want to do them at. Another point I wanted to make was that Kemi's language I thought was really interesting today. She keeps mentioning words like the economy being vulnerable and fragile. I think that kind of works, actually, that sort of argument of stability versus fragility. Keir Starmer keeps saying that he wants to stabilise the public finances, that he's come in to sort everything out. And actually, the reality is that in the economy, in many areas of public life, in our public services, things for many people still do feel quite fragile. And I think she can tap into that as a bit of a sore spot for the Prime Minister. And I think if she uses words like that and that sort of language and that narrative, I think that could quite work for her.
I suppose, alternatively, it could also add this toing and froing over whose fault it all is. It could also add to the narrative I find very unhelpful, but it's popular. They're all as bad as each other, which is, good news for Nigel Farage and his mates. Of course, so hard to keep up with who his mates currently are. They're 4 MPs at the moment, or 5.
4. Yeah, exactly. Week to week depends who his friends are. But exactly, it does, and that's bad for British politics if you think they're all the same and it's just two sides fighting.
Which brings us to Ed Davey, who is not the same, and who unfortunately only gets attention in some corners of the media. You, of course, were on this programme with a very interesting interview with Ed Davey just a couple of weeks ago, but some corners of the media only really notice his existence when he starts prancing around in his Speedos or dancing around on a hobby horse. Good questions this week again, and he's an interesting politician. He's not a cookie cutter politician. No. He's sometimes very statesmanlike in a context of PMQs, which is often anything but.
Yeah, and the way that he asks his questions are really, I think he's such a statesman and an experienced politician that he knows exactly how to ask a question that's going to get people to sit up and pay attention. And that's exactly what Keir Starmer did when he said the words, are you going to build an economic coalition of the willing like you've done so for defence? And that's a really interesting way of putting it into ball into his court. Well, you're standing by the EU on Ukraine, you're standing with Canada. Why aren't you standing with them on trade? And that's going to be a question that's going to potentially make life incredibly awkward for Keir Starmer going forward, because if that starts to rub some of our friends and allies up the wrong way, well, why aren't you standing with your oldest friends? And, the person who you have the biggest trading relationship with, the EU, you're completely going in a different direction from us. So that could make
So you go from trying to have your cake and eat it to
upsetting the other person.
Yes.
You end up, you can't be a bridge.
Whatever the opposite of having your cake and eating it is.
Yeah, having no cake at all.
Cake and not eating it.
Keir Starmer wants to be the bridge, but he's going to fall in between the cracks.
It's a really good point. And I have to tell you, I know it's only anecdotal, but more and more people are expressing profound frustration, and it speaks to part of Ed Davey's question about the utter failure ever to mention Brexit when Keir Starmer is talking about economic problems or inheritances or black holes. And for people lucky enough not to have to pay full attention to this day in, day out like we do, it is increasingly mystifying.
I think he doesn't want to upset a chunk of the electorate which still believe that that's the right way to go, even though most of the polling shows that a lot of people have changed their minds about it. But I just think he doesn't want to open up that can of worms right now. But eventually it will inevitably open up when he starts these negotiations over redoing a trade negotiation with the EU. So these conversations are coming. Keir Starmer can't avoid them forever. He is going to have to at some point deal up to them. But it's a bit of an easy lever to pull, isn't it?
Of course it is.
To say, or just blame Brexit for everything, when actually it's the fault of many of our politicians. And isn't it easier to blame the Conservatives? Isn't it a nicer political argument to go, well, it's actually all of their fault, rather than blame the people that voted for
Brexit,
them.
You're blaming the voters, you're right.
Exactly. So this is easier to say blame Kemi Badenoch and her party instead.
Lovely stuff. Thank you, Natasha. Anything else?
I like the way that Ed Davey asked that last question about Thames Water. That was really interesting. That's something that the Keir Starmer, obviously campaign on. He's going to clean up our rivers. Yeah. They allowed it, he shouldn't. He's very punchy, isn't he? He can be very, very punchy when he wants to be, when he can get very angry and very emotive on issues that he really cares about. Sewage, carers, Israel. I thought Israel might come up for a
I did as well. I thought that's where he was going to go with the coalition of the willing, actually. But,
interesting.
But they went down the economy line.
Maybe next week. Well, we'll see you in 2-3 weeks.
Yes, indeedy. Thank you, Natasha. It is 12:32. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:34 is the time. It is, an almost unbelievable scenario. You are making a film, and I'm thinking chiefly of the director of the film and the main contributor to a film, about Russia's assassination machine. It's so-called kill lists, something that we've discussed on the programme before, of course, with people like Bill Browder, who has found himself on one. And you discover halfway through filming that you are on it yourself. And that is the experience of the investigative journalist Christo Grozev and the director James Jones, who together made the film Kill List, Hunted by Putin's Spies. You can stream it currently on Channel 4 and under the title Antidote. It's on in some selected cinemas as well. Have a little listen to a little bit of it.
My dad is a resourceful and determined yet silly man who has managed to make one of the most dangerous men on the planet very angry. But he's also not the man he used to be. His life changed a lot.
In what way?
Well, this isn't what he used to do for work, right? He was a businessman. He managed radios and
like radio stations?
Yeah. And then ever since 2014, he started following his passion, which was journalism. I think this is the real Christo. This obsessive journalist guy who sifts through spreadsheets all night to find something. Also, it's a bit of a like David versus Goliath thing. Like it's one guy with his crypto that he buys the information with versus a murderous regime, right? So I respect him for what he's doing now. Yeah, there's challenges and sacrifices, but I support him 100%.
That's Christo's son, Christian, in a remarkably poignant contribution to a remarkable film. And I'll begin, I think, quite unprofessionally by asking you, Christo, how you felt the first time you saw that bit of the film, or how you felt when you saw your boy talking about you in such terms.
I don't know how to express it because we're not my kids have never been oversharing, and we don't share emotions. And the first time I heard how my son feels about my work was when I was watching the finished film, because he had spoken to James, but he had not spoken to me about it. And as you can imagine, it brought me to tears.
Gosh. And it is to James I will turn next, just to ask about this moment of jeopardy. You're a creator, an artist, as well as a documentary maker. Was it really halfway through filming, or have you printed the legend?
Well, I mean, usually I have to respond with "take your pick," but in this particular case, we had we had a sort of pedigree of investigations that were extremely damaging for Russian intelligence operations, including the whole string of investigations that started with the Skripal's poisoning, which discovered not only who did it, but also how they used consecutive passport numbers for their fake identities, which led us to disclose more than 70 spies that had done committed crimes across Europe and the world. But you can imagine how many more would have been discovered based on that knowledge by counterintelligence services. So that must have been very painful. But when we look back at the history of the chats, because the craziest thing about this group of 6 was that they were arrested having not deleted their chat history. And this we could reconstruct, or the police could reconstruct, and we can only later follow their trail, what really happened. And based on the day that they were given the task to start following me and surveil me and my family, that coincides with the day of the publication of the investigation into the poisoning of Alexei Navalny, which was not only an important investigation, and it proved that the FSB, Russia's domestic intelligence service, had poisoned him, tried to kill him. But it was extremely humiliating for President Putin himself, because he went on a limb on a press conference saying it wasn't us. And then that investigation actually not only proved it was them, but actually extracted a confession in one of the most ridiculously honest confession by a killer that I've ever seen. That was the confession during a prank call by Alexei Navalny that I had helped set up.
And that is that in the film? Do you include the prank? You don't. I didn't think you did, but it's still available. You can, literally just Google the words.
It's on YouTube.
Just Google what Christo just said, and you'll find it. You mentioned Alexei, and I've asked his widow Yulia this question. I've also asked Vladimir Kara-Murza as well, but I don't think I've ever asked you. Given the obvious risks, given the obvious jeopardy that you place yourself and potentially your family in, as you discovered that day in the United States, although you wouldn't have been too surprised by the discovery. Why do you do what you do, Christo?
Well, in a way, once you start, you can't stop because the risk is there. The risk is binary. It doesn't go away. And by stopping, you will just be giving the bad guys a present without really minimizing the risk for yourself or for the loved ones. So, I mean, I didn't know when I started doing this in 2014 that it would end up with this amount of risk. But now that the risk is there, it just would be counterproductive and irresponsible to stop.
Gosh. James, I know that you made a film previously about Chernobyl, and albeit there's a difference between retrospective filmmaking and covering a story that is unfolding literally live as you do it. But you see quite a few parallels between the two phenomena, I think.
Yeah, I mean, our Chernobyl film kind of traced the accident and the lies and the cover-up and kind of throwing bodies onto the reactor to deal with the crisis, and then the Soviet Union collapsing under the weight of its own lies. And when we were making this, a bit of me hoped this would be a kind of updated version of that, with the war in Ukraine and, Putin's activities around the world being exposed by people like Christo. That so far hasn't come to fruition, and with a new person in the White House probably seems less likely even than it did 6 months ago. But I think, and Christo's more optimistic than I am on this, but Christo's work not only exposes the spies and assassins, but humiliated Putin. And, we hope that this film will be seen not just in Europe and America, but also inside Russia. And I think, you need people to understand that Putin is not this kind of master genius strategist that some people treat him as, but he's a kind of petty, vindictive and thin-skinned man.
And some of the operatives on the ground, most obviously, I guess, the 6 Bulgarian spies that were uncovered, are pretty incompetent too sometimes.
They're not trained spies, and Christo's burned so many of them. They're having to rely on these kind of amateurish freelancers. I guess the problem is it's very hard to mitigate that risk when everyone is, any small-time criminal will do something for £10,000 or $10,000 euros, and that is scary because even though they're not trained, every now and then they'll get it right, and that could be beating someone up. It could be setting fire to their home. It could be anything. So that unknowable threat is scary.
It's a film about bravery as well, not just of Christo, of course. The scientist who essentially blew the whistle on the Novichok poison program flees to the West, not knowing whether his family would ever be able to get out and join him, and you're there, I think, when they do. How do you maintain emotional distance when you're dealing with stuff that is so profoundly powerful?
Yeah, so I was on the border waiting for him to illegally cross to safety and freedom, and I didn't feel a lot of emotional distance in that moment. I was pretty nervous driving up and down looking for border guards. But yeah, and actually, he's a complicated figure in that he was at the heart of darkness, working on Novichok, which was used to poison people like Alexei Navalny. And yet, that was the very first thing that I filmed. And
Dawn Sturgis, of course.
Yeah,
well.
Absolutely. And it became clear in that moment the stakes for him in risking his own safety, but also his family's future by speaking out. It was clear that the film kind of morphed into being about what you risk and what you sacrifice in telling the truth about the regime, not just the kind of inner workings of the poison program.
So it becomes a film about humanity and optimism. And Christo, James mentions you're more optimistic than he is. Why? Why are you optimistic?
Well, for one thing, because I think empires like this, like Russia, they thrive on the cult to the violence and infallibility of their intelligence services. And the more they get humiliated, the more it becomes an emperor's has no clothes moment for them. And I think at the time at Bellingcat, I think that was our biggest achievement. I mean, creating consecutive piece of evidence that this is not an infallible scary operation. It is scary, but they make blunders, and each such new disclosure chips away from the one thing that Putin or any emperor, any authoritarian leader actually cherishes, which is their scariness. And even with the arrest of the 6 bumbling idiots who almost killed my family, that is a failure. That is a major failure. And the more people see the ridiculousness of their plots in Russia, as James said, the closer we're getting to the end of this regime. And it will end. There's no question about it. The only question is, are they getting a sort of a lifeline at the moment by other
you preempt my final question. I was going to ask whether that inevitable termination has been prolonged by the recent arrivals in the White House. Have you been surprised at some of the tone of Trump's intervention?
There's almost no question that Trump is trying to mimic the early days of the Putin ascent to power and trying to benefit from what he saw would last 25 years after that. So, including the Greenland annexation, which mimics the Crimea annexation, including the third term through loopholes in the constitution, which is exactly what Putin did. But again, it takes one of these examples to fall apart, and then everything the chips will fall after that. So that's why I think it makes sense to focus for me to continue focusing on that regime, and I think everything else is a derivative.
And you still haven't been able to go home? You're still living in New York as a consequence of the...
No, I have had occasional visits, my children's birthdays and so on and so forth, but that is a counterintelligence operation on its own, where the domestic security service of Austria really, really treats me like a president under threat. So it's not a viable option.
No, I hear you. Christo, Grozev, thank you. Investigative journalist speaking to us from New York, and James Jones, the Emmy award-winning filmmaker and director of Kill List, Hunted by Putin's Spies. Why has it got a different name in the cinemas? Just because that's what the distributors wanted?
Antidote is the original title, and Channel 4 thought Kill List was a bit more punchy.
Yeah. And that is available to stream on Channel 4 and indeed to watch in some selected cinemas as well. What are you working on next? Can you tell me?
Fukushima. Another cheerful subject.
I was only asking. Thank you very much, James Jones, and thank you, Christo Grozev. It's 12:48.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:51. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I was joking earlier when I said I felt it duty bound to talk about at least one television programme other than Adolescence this week, because it seems that is the only programme that has been broadcast in Britain for the last few months. I want to draw to your attention, I've mentioned it to you before and I have urged you to watch it, but I want to do so again. The series Borders, BBC sitcom Borders, which puts 5 black teenagers from inner city London in the middle of a boarding school that is rather like mine, apart from the absence of monks and the presence of girls. Apart from that, they are largely interchangeable, and I had no idea what to expect. But somehow the show's creator, Daniel Lawrence Taylor, who you might know from his comedy work in the duo Ginger and Black, you might have seen him pop up very briefly, I think it's fair to say, in The In-Betweeners.
Yeah, very, very, very.
And also Lobbyland, the BBC Radio 4 political satire, and other things too. But this is your baby.
Yeah. Very much my baby.
Where does it come from? Where does the idea come from?
So it all started from an article that was shown to me, which was about 5 kids that were from East London who were sent to private school, to rugby private school. And I remember reading it, and it just really chimed with me. I didn't go to boarding school or anything like that, but my university was like predominantly white, predominantly middle class, so it's very much a different world to where I came from. And
what did you know about boarding schools prior to that?
What did I know about them? Not much, really, if I'm being honest. I knew that they were like an alien world, and I also knew that it was just like the breeding ground for prime ministers and so on and so forth. So that's all I really knew. But I just knew that it was a space which wasn't meant for 5 young working class boys. And so I think that's why it was so interesting to kind of dive into it, really.
It's a distillation, though, isn't it, of some universal truths. So it becomes a wonderful crucible in which racial tension, unwitting racism, as well as explicit, implicit and complicit and explicit, all the racisms can be examined almost in magnified.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I think, like, even though I pick a boarding school, I think the same experiences run through most institutions in the UK. So whether it was when I was at university or even the industry I'm working in, it just mirrors one another.
How hard was it to get off the ground? I mean, you've got a track record, but you're not in. I mean, very, very few people, if anyone, are in a position. Even Stephen Graham doesn't necessarily get a project greenlit simply by saying, "Please, will you greenlight this project?"
No, yeah, it's a process. We kind of, but not as hard as like a lot of other shows. Like the turnaround was actually quite quick. I think I was able to. I put together a script, so it was so I had proof of concept, and I think having that very strong premise, those 5 strong characters, I think the world was set up really, really well, and that it was, it's a brilliant fish out of water story. So I think the commissioners was able to see that, and yeah.
Up and running. Second series rolling. Josh Duduku, one of the stars, picking up a newcomer award at the RTS Awards just last week. You've got a big hit on your hands. Do you know when you're writing it?
When I was... No. Well, no. I think when I was writing it, I was very much writing it for me. And I think I was just like, I find this funny and I like this and I find this interesting. I think it's not until we got closer to the TX and we had more people out, editors would come in and sound designers and everything and kind of saying how good it was. Yeah. And then I started to panic because I was like, oh, actually, it's for the outside world and people are actually going to judge it. But I think kind of then I realized I had something on my hands. And then also because of people like Josh and all the other cast members, I knew that they elevated it so much. So I kind of knew that I had something special.
I mean, it's beautifully cast as well, isn't it? I mean, it's, and some, a big hit on your hands. Series 2, you get some celebrity big star cameos in the second series as well. Yeah. But I'm intrigued by how you got the school so right, given that you weren't drawing on any personal experience there. How did you get the kind of undercurrents and tensions?
Several things. I think one, I had a great writer's room, and I had some
full of toffs.
Well, no. Luckily, not too many.
You needed one, surely. You needed at least one waistcoat in the room.
I had one, but funnily enough, a lovely guy, Alex McKeith, and he's actually from a working class background that went to Eton. Okay. So he was really
interested. He's got that double bubble then.
Exactly, okay. And that was really nice. Lots of research, lots of documentaries, and again, it's like I think these institutions kind of mirror one another. So I think
sure do. Yes, of course they do.
So
but the public schools are like, as I say, like a distillation of so much else. Have you seen If? Did you watch If?
Yes, which is brilliant. Yeah. Yeah, really,
It's about me.
I hope that wasn't you at the end.
No, that's not only in my mind, only in my dreams. What was the weirdest thing for you to discover about the world that was my normal when I was a teenager? What for you, it was an alien world. What was the weirdest thing to discover, if you can pin down anything?
I mean, what's so odd is the concept of just leaving your children somewhere. It kind of blew my mind, and I didn't quite understand how you could do that. And so when you talk about, politicians who, lack emotions and feelings and so on and so forth, you kind of get it because all these kids were forced to kind of like bottle it up because you weren't allowed to show that emotion, and then they're kind of like sent out into the world and then, given the power to like dictate how everyone else's worlds are. So I think that was like the biggest shock to me.
And that's one of the great triumphs of the writing, is that the beneficiaries of the privilege are written with as much nuance and sympathy as the interlopers.
That's what I tried to my best to do.
Yeah, thank you for doing that.
Well, I think, because I think, going into this, and it was one thing that we spoke about a lot in the writers' room. I said, I strongly believe it's like, it's not a lot of the time it's not individuals, it's the institutions. And I think it's the institutions that are problematic, and it's the fact that they're unwilling to change, which causes a lot of problems.
And you can't understand the UK if you don't understand these schools. You can't understand power, class. You can't understand Boris Johnson's reaction to COVID without understanding the schools that he went to.
100%.
I don't know if you've heard this before. 2 types of people in this country. People who, when they meet someone new, ask what school they went to. And people who think that would be the stupidest question you could ever ask someone.
That is very true. That is very, very true, yeah. but that's the world, isn't
Never
it?
changes.
Yeah.
My old mate Andy, who's not with us anymore, who ended up moving in, very highfalutin circles. He used to love it when they asked, because he'd just say, I went to Alder Hill Comprehensive in Rochdale. Why? Why do you want to know? who do you know that went there? But it's still true. It's as true now as it was 100 years ago. Thank you, mate. It's a pleasure to meet you. It really is, and it is such a superb piece of work that you've made. Series 3 underway now. So writing.
Oh, I'm writing it. Yeah. So fingers crossed for the green light. So we'll see.
Daniel Lawrence Taylor, I think you know you're going to be all right.
I hope so.
And if you haven't watched Borders yet, you can thank me later. Seriously. I can't watch Series 2 until my oldest comes back from university, because we watch it together and we made a pledge that we would continue to do so. So you can get stuck into it now. Inhale the whole lot. That's it from me for today. We can do it all again tomorrow morning from 10. If you missed any of today's show, don't forget that you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. Download it now for free from your app store, or just head to globalplayer.com. Tom Sawbrick will be with you at 4. But now, on LBC, it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.